I stayed quiet because I had no proof. They knew it. They counted on it. Then my neighbor left a flash drive on my porch with a note that read, "My camera covered your driveway for 5 years." I brought all 38 videos to court without giving them a single warning. Watching their smug smiles drop in real time was worth every moment of hell they put me through. My name is Chloe Hastings. I am 32 years old, and for 5 years my family used me as their personal bank. Before I tell you how a single piece of plastic brought down an entire counterfeit empire, let me know where you are listening from and what time it is right now. Drop a comment below and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe blood does not give anyone the right to abuse your trust. We were sitting in the Essex County Courthouse, the air heavy with tension. Across the mahogany table, my sister Harper adjusted her designer scarf. Her husband Marcus checked his gold watch, looking bored. My parents flanked them, casting disappointed glares my way. They thought this was a formality. They thought I was surrendering. To understand how we ended up in that room, you have to go back to my carriage house 5 years ago. I run an antique appraisal and restoration firm. My clients trust me with items older than the country itself. The carriage house on my property doubled as my climate-controlled storage. One Tuesday, an 18th-century French enamel clock vanished from the top shelf. 2 weeks later, a restored mahogany writing desk followed. There were no signs of forced entry. The deadbolt was pristine. Only 2 other people had a spare key, Harper and Marcus. Harper was 36, a woman who treated every minor inconvenience as a Greek tragedy. Marcus, 38, was a striking, smooth-talking financial advisor who wore bespoke suits and carried an air of unearned authority. I drove to their house that evening. Marcus was in their kitchen pouring a glass of bourbon. I stood in the doorway and asked him straight out where my client's items went. Marcus did not blink. He took a slow sip of his drink, offered a patronizing smile, and said, "Chloe, you work 80-hour weeks inhaling wood varnish. You are stressed. You are imagining things." Harper walked in, clutching her chest. She looked at me with wide, wounded eyes. "How can you walk into our home and accuse my husband of stealing? You know he manages millions. Why would he need your dusty furniture?" My parents arrived 20 minutes later, summoned by Harper, shedding crocodile tears. My mother stood between Marcus and me, her jaw set. She told me my anxiety was out of control. My father suggested I needed to see a therapist before I ruined the family reputation with baseless claims. I called the police the next morning. 2 officers stood in my carriage house taking notes with noticeable apathy. They told me without video footage or a forced entry, it was a civil family dispute. They closed their notebooks and left. Marcus knew the law. He knew he was untouchable without hard evidence. I stood alone in my empty storage space, realizing my own family had formed a wall to protect a thief. I decided to swallow my pride. I called my mother, apologized for overreacting, and said I would look into hiring a security firm to check my locks. I needed them to think they had won so I could figure out my next move. That same night, I sat at my kitchen island sorting through my mail. I logged into my business banking portal to pay a vendor. My stomach dropped. A pending charge glared back at me from the screen. $15,000 at a luxury jewelry boutique in Manhattan. The card had been physically swiped. Marcus did not just have the key to my carriage house. He had somehow gotten access to my business credit line. And as I stared at the screen, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Harper featuring a photo of her wearing a new diamond tennis bracelet captioned, "Marcus spoils me too much." I did not confront Marcus again that night. Yelling would only give them more ammunition to paint me as unstable. Instead, I sat at my kitchen island, opened my laptop, and accessed my banking portal. I watched the pending $15,000 transaction sitting there like an open wound. I picked up my phone and dialed the fraud department. I kept my voice steady, reporting the physical card stolen and authorizing an immediate freeze on every business account linked to my name. If Marcus wanted to fund his luxury lifestyle using my sweat and labor, he would find the tap run completely dry. I closed the laptop, poured the rest of my cold tea down the sink, and waited for the inevitable retaliation. It arrived less than 12 hours later. The next morning, I was in my restoration studio. The space smelled heavily of beeswax-aged leather and the sharp tang of mineral spirits. My assistant, a quiet design student named Leo, was cataloging a recent estate purchase near the front window. The heavy oak door of the studio swung open with such force that the brass bell above it tore loose and clattered onto the hardwood floor. Harper marched inside. She was wearing a tailored cashmere coat and the brand-new diamond tennis bracelet she had purchased with my stolen funds. She did not bother to lower her voice. She wanted an audience. "You have lost your mind, Chloe," she shouted, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. Leo froze, dropping his clipboard onto a display table. Harper stormed right up to my drafting desk, her eyes flashing with a practiced theatrical fury. "You canceled the credit card. You are actually trying to frame my husband for fraud because you are too incompetent to manage your own finances." I set my tools down. I did not match her volume. I asked her to keep her voice down and reminded her that she was standing in a place of business. Harper let out a harsh, mocking laugh. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, slamming it down flat over my blueprints. I looked at the document. It bore the letterhead of a prominent private psychiatric clinic in the city. It was a formal-looking assessment signed by a doctor I had never met. The text outlined a concerning pattern of severe paranoia work, induced stress, and delusional behavior. It recommended immediate intervention. "Marcus had this drawn up for your own good," Harper announced, making sure her voice carried loud enough for Leo to hear every word. She adopted a tone of dripping, condescending pity. "We know you are working too hard, Chloe. You are imagining thieves in the shadows. You are hallucinating missing furniture. You need serious medical help before you destroy your own life and drag our family name through the mud." She spun a flawless narrative right there in my studio. She played the tragic, concerned sibling forced to deal with an unhinged sister. It was gaslighting elevated to an art form. She was creating a paper trail of mental instability to discredit any accusation I might make against her husband. I folded the fake medical certificate, slid it back across the desk, and pointed toward the door. I told her to leave before I called the police for trespassing. She glared at me, her mask of pity slipping just enough to reveal pure malice before spinning on her heel and marching out into the street. The real trap snapped shut 3 hours later when my father called. My parents were obsessed with their standing in the local country club circuit. They curated their social image with ruthless precision. 5 years ago, they had provided the initial seed money to help me open my restoration firm. It was a loan I had been steadily repaying with interest, but their name remained on the primary commercial lease as guarantors. My father did not ask for my side of the story. He delivered an ultimatum. He told me my baseless jealousy toward Marcus was a profound embarrassment. Marcus managed portfolios for half of their friends. A scandal would ruin my parents' social currency. My father informed me that they were hosting a large dinner party that coming Saturday. The guest list included local politicians, real estate developers, and key figures in their elite circle. "You will stand up at that dinner," my father dictated his tone, leaving zero room for negotiation, "and you will offer a formal public apology to Marcus for your erratic behavior. If you choose to embarrass us further, your mother and I will call in the business loan immediately. We will pull our backing from your lease. We will bankrupt your firm by Monday morning." They backed me into a corner using their financial leverage to shield a thief. I was entirely isolated. Law enforcement would not help me without proof. My own blood was actively plotting my financial ruin. I realized that fighting them directly was a losing battle. I needed to shift the battleground. I agreed to attend the dinner. I promised my father I would make an announcement regarding Marcus. He hung up satisfied that the rebellious daughter had been brought to heel. I spent the next 48 hours executing a quiet counteroffensive. I did not hire a local accountant who might play golf with my father or run in the same circles as Marcus. I reached out to a high-profile forensic accounting firm based in Manhattan. These were the kind of corporate sharks who investigated offshore tax evasion and corporate embezzlement. I signed a hefty retainer agreement granting them full, unrestricted access to every ledger invoice and bank record tied to my business and personal accounts. I scheduled them to begin their deep dive on Monday morning. Saturday night arrived. My parents' dining room was a masterclass in excess. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over sterling silver cutlery and imported floral arrangements. The room buzzed with the low, confident hum of the city elite. Harper sat across from me, sipping champagne, her diamond bracelet sparkling under the lights. Marcus stood near the head of the table, holding court, looking like the picture of untouchable grace. He caught my eye and offered a faint, arrogant smirk. He thought he had broken me. When the dessert plates were cleared, my mother tapped her crystal glass with a silver spoon. The conversation in the room died down. She looked at me with a rigid, expectant smile. Everyone turned their attention my way. The silence was heavy, suffocating. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I smoothed the front of my dress. I looked directly at my father, then at my mother, and finally locked eyes with Marcus. I thanked my parents for hosting such a beautiful evening. I acknowledged the esteemed guests in the room. Then I delivered my apology. Recently, I began keeping my voice bright and steady. There have been some unfortunate discrepancies regarding my business accounts and missing inventory. I know this has caused unnecessary stress for my family, particularly for Marcus, who has been nothing but invested in our shared success. My mother nodded approvingly. Harper smiled into her wine glass. To ensure absolute transparency and to definitively clear Marcus of any misunderstanding regarding the management of my accounts, I continued the pitch of my voice, never wavering. I have retained an independent forensic auditor from a top-tier firm in New York. They have been granted full authorization to comb through every transaction, every deleted record, and every withdrawal made over the last 3 years. They begin their investigation on Monday morning. The room remained quiet, but the atmospheric pressure shifted entirely. The guests nodded, murmuring their approval at what sounded like a responsible professional business decision. My parents looked slightly confused, unsure if they had just witnessed an apology or an ambush. But I only watched Marcus. His arrogant smirk vanished. The charm evaporated from his face, replaced by a cold, hard panic. He gripped his crystal tumbler so tightly, his knuckles turned stark white. He managed a stiff nod for the benefit of the watching crowd, but the predatory glint in his eyes had turned frantic. I had cornered him in public, using the very audience my parents gathered to ensure he could not object without looking guilty. I left the dinner party feeling a rare surge of control. I had set the wheels in motion. A forensic audit would bypass the missing antiques and uncover the digital trail of his theft. I went to sleep that night knowing I had finally trapped him. I arrived at my studio early Monday morning, eager to hand over my encrypted hard drives to the investigation team. At 8:15, my desk phone rang. The caller ID showed the Manhattan accounting firm. I picked up the receiver, expecting the lead investigator to ask for my server passwords. Instead, his voice, which had been brisk and confident on Friday, sounded tight and strained. "Miss Hastings," he said quickly, rushing through the words, "we are dropping your case effective immediately. A full refund of your retainer has already been wired back to your account." I froze. I asked him why. I offered to double his fee. I reminded him we had a signed contract. "You do not understand," he interrupted, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "This goes far beyond mislaid antiques and credit card fraud. We cannot represent you. Do not call this office again. Do not contact any of my staff." He hung up. I stood in the quiet of my studio, listening to the dead dial tone buzzing against my ear. A cold chill crawled up my spine, settling heavily in my chest. What kind of leverage did a local financial advisor possess to terrify a top-tier Manhattan forensic auditor into quitting overnight? The dead dial tone was still ringing in my ear when the morning mail arrived. My assistant Leo dropped a stack of envelopes on my desk, oblivious to the cold sweat forming at my hairline. I sorted through the pile mechanically until my hand stopped on a thick certified envelope bearing the logo of First National Bank. I did not have commercial accounts with First National. I tore the flap open, sliding out a stack of dense legal paperwork. It was not a standard bank statement. It was a formal notice of default and an impending notice of foreclosure. The target property was my carriage house, the property I owned outright. I scanned the numbers printed in stark black ink. $300,000. That was the principal amount of a commercial equity loan taken out against my property exactly 4 months ago. I flipped to the disbursement record attached to the back. The funds had not been sent to any account I recognized. The entire $300,000 had been wired directly into Hayes Vanguard Capital, the primary investment vehicle managed by my brother-in-law Marcus. My eyes darted to the final page containing the signature line. Staring back at me was my own name. The loops and angles were a flawless replication of my handwriting. Beneath it sat a notary stamp from a county clerk I had never heard of, authorizing a debt that was currently 90 days past due. Marcus had not just swiped my credit card for a diamond bracelet. He had secretly leveraged my entire livelihood, drained the equity, and funneled the cash straight into his failing portfolios to keep his facade alive. I did not call my lawyer. I did not call the police. I grabbed my car keys and drove straight to the affluent suburb of Short Hills. Marcus and Harper lived in a sprawling modern estate built on gate-kept privilege and loud aesthetics. I bypassed the security keypad because they had never bothered to change the code I helped them set up 2 years ago. I walked through the heavy mahogany front doors without knocking. I found Marcus in his home office. The room smelled of expensive leather and citrus cologne. He was standing by a marble wet bar, casually pouring a measure of amber bourbon into a crystal glass. He did not flinch when I slammed the heavy oak door shut behind me. He did not look surprised. He took a slow sip of his drink and turned to face me. I threw the foreclosure notice across his pristine glass desk. The papers fanned out, revealing the forged signature and the wire transfer records. I asked him how long he thought he could hide a federal crime. I told him he had crossed the line from petty theft into wire fraud and identity theft. I promised him I would be standing in the district attorney's office before noon. Marcus walked around the desk, his expensive leather shoes silent on the Persian rug. He picked up the notice, glanced at it with utter boredom, and tossed it into his wastebasket. "You have an impressive imagination, Chloe," he said, his voice smooth and entirely devoid of panic. "But you have zero proof." I pointed at the wastebasket. I told him the bank held the original documents, and a handwriting expert would dismantle his forged notary stamp in a single afternoon. He was going to prison. Marcus let out a low, patronizing chuckle. He leaned against the edge of his desk, swirling the ice in his glass. "You are not going to call the police," he stated. "You are not going to call a lawyer. You are going to go back to your dusty little workshop and figure out how to make your monthly payments." I stepped closer, the anger burning hot in my throat. I demanded to know why he thought I would ever protect him. "Because you will not destroy your parents," he replied, his eyes locking onto mine with the predatory stillness of a snake. He set his drink down and clasped his hands together. He explained his architecture of ruin with terrifying clarity. The $300,000 he stole from me was just a drop in the bucket. His investment fund was bleeding cash. To keep his operation afloat and maintain his country club lifestyle, he had required massive capital injections. He did not use his own assets as collateral. He used my parents. He leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a clinical whisper. "Your mother and father signed on as the primary personal guarantors for Hayes Vanguard Capital. They pledged their Beacon Hill estate, their retirement portfolios, and their stock options to back my credit lines. They think they are helping their golden son-in-law secure bridge funding." The air in the room grew heavy. My lungs felt tight. Marcus watched the realization wash over my face and smiled. "If you walk into a police station and claim identity theft, the bank will immediately freeze my accounts pending an investigation. If my accounts freeze, the fund defaults. If the fund defaults, the creditors will not come after me. They will trigger the guarantor clause. They will seize your parents' house. They will liquidate their retirement. Your mother and father will be sleeping in a motel by the end of the month, and it will be your fault." He had built a human shield out of my own family. He weaponized their vanity and their blind trust in him to trap me. If I swung the sword to cut off his head, the blade would decapitate my parents first. I hated their elitism, and I hated how they treated me. But condemning 2 elderly people to sudden crushing poverty was a line I hesitated to cross. Marcus had banked his entire survival on my morality. Harper walked into the office right at that moment. She was wearing workout clothes, tapping mindlessly on her phone. She glanced at me with an expression of mild disgust, then looked at Marcus, her voice shifting into a sweet, demanding whine. She told him her credit card had declined at the Pilates studio and asked him to transfer more funds to her checking account. Marcus offered her a warm, loving smile. He kissed her forehead and promised to handle it immediately. He looked back at me over her shoulder. His eyes were dead, challenging me to speak. I stood at a crossroads. Every instinct screamed at me to flip the glass desk and burn the house down. But attacking blindly would leave me with nothing but collateral damage. I needed to uncouple my parents from his sinking ship before I detonated the explosive. I had to let him think he had won. I had to play the defeated victim to buy myself time. I lowered my gaze, staring at the Persian rug. I let my shoulders slump. I turned around and walked out of the home office without saying another word. I walked through the grand foyer, out the heavy doors, and got into my car. I drove away from the estate, my knuckles gripping the steering wheel until my hands cramped. I had lost the battle, but the war was far from over. I navigated the afternoon traffic back to my property. The sky had turned a bruising shade of gray, threatening rain. I pulled into the gravel driveway leading to the carriage house. My plan was to review my remaining inventory, sell whatever I could, and try to negotiate a payment plan with the bank to stall the foreclosure. I stepped out of my car and walked toward the heavy oak doors of the studio. My heart skipped a beat. The heavy iron padlock I had installed just 3 days ago was missing. Shards of broken metal lay scattered across the concrete step. Deep gouges scarred the wood where a crowbar had been forced into the doorframe. I shoved the door open. The interior was eerily quiet. I ran past the front display tables, ignoring the scattered tools and overturned chairs. I sprinted toward the secure, climate-controlled vault at the back of the building. The steel cage door hung wide open. My eyes scanned the velvet-lined shelves. My lungs stopped working. The centerpiece of my current workload was gone. It was a 17th-century silver tea service belonging to an imposing federal judge who sat on the district court. The piece was valued at $50,000, and the judge had entrusted it to my care under a strict liability contract. It was an irreplaceable family heirloom. If Marcus stole my personal furniture, it was a civil family dispute. But Marcus had just stolen property belonging to a sitting federal judge from my custody. The police would not treat this as a misunderstanding. I was legally responsible for the loss. I was no longer dealing with bankruptcy. I was standing on the verge of facing criminal negligence and jail time, and I had absolutely no way to prove who broke the lock. I did not waste time breaking down in tears. Panic is a luxury for people who have someone coming to rescue them. I had no one. The missing silver tea service was a ticking bomb, and the federal judge would not accept excuses about family drama. I marched back to my house, logged into my emergency savings, and drained it entirely. I liquidated a mutual fund I had been building since I was 22. I drafted a cashier's check for $50,000 and hand-delivered it to the judge's office the next morning, claiming a catastrophic structural failure in my studio had damaged the piece beyond repair. I swallowed the humiliation, signed a non-disclosure agreement, and walked out functionally broke, but legally safe. I had plugged the hole in the dam, but the water was still rising. I shifted my focus entirely. If law enforcement needed proof, I would have to become my own detective. I needed to dismantle Marcus's carefully constructed facade. The man played the role of a Wall Street titan perfectly, but a real financial prodigy does not steal antique tea sets to stay afloat. He was bleeding cash, and I needed to find out why. I started tracking his digital footprint. I monitored the public filings of Hayes Vanguard Capital. The firm boasted a sleek website filled with stock photos of glass skyscrapers and vague promises of aggressive yield management. Yet I noticed alarming irregularities. Marcus had not filed a quarterly SEC disclosure in over 8 months. The corporate address listed for his main office routed to a cheap virtual mailbox service in Delaware. While I spent my nights digging through corporate registry databases, my sister Harper spent her days flaunting the spoils of my stolen equity. Her social media feeds became an agonizing daily broadcast of luxury. She posted a photo of herself leaning against the hood of a brand-new Porsche Cayenne. The caption read, "Early anniversary gift from the best husband in the world." 2 days later, a video surfaced showing them clinking champagne flutes in a private villa in the Maldives. Every Birkin bag, every Michelin star dinner, every extravagant trip was financed by the forged commercial loan taken out against my carriage house. She was parading my financial ruin as her personal fairy tale. The real conflict erupted a week after they returned from the Maldives. My phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon. It was my mother. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not ask about my business. She demanded I come to their Beacon Hill estate immediately for a family meeting. I arrived to find the familiar tribunal waiting for me. My parents sat rigidly on their velvet sofa. Harper and Marcus sat across from them, looking relaxed and triumphant. My father cleared his throat and assumed his usual dictatorial tone. He informed me that Marcus was expanding his firm. His current office space was no longer sufficient for his growing operations. My father announced, as if granting me a tremendous honor, that they had decided the carriage house on my property would be the perfect location for his new annex office. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the sheer audacity. They wanted me to hand over the very building Marcus had just secretly mortgaged and plundered. I told them the carriage house was my restoration studio. It housed sensitive chemicals, heavy machinery, and client inventory. It was not zoned or equipped for a financial firm. My mother dismissed my objections with a wave of her hand. She claimed my restoration work was more of a hobby than a real career. She insisted Marcus was managing high-net-worth portfolios and needed a secure private location immediately. I refused. I told them flatly that Marcus was not setting foot on my property. The atmosphere in the living room turned venomous. My father stood up, his face reddening with anger. He reminded me that he and my mother were the guarantors on my initial business lease. He accused me of being selfish, jealous, and intent on sabotaging my sister's success. He delivered his final ultimatum. If you do not sign a lease agreement granting Marcus unrestricted use of that carriage house by tomorrow morning, my father threatened, his voice echoing in the large room, your mother and I will cut you off entirely. We will withdraw our backing from your commercial lease. We will write you out of the family trust. You will no longer be considered a member of this family. Harper watched me with a smug, satisfied smile. Marcus adjusted his cuffs, his expression radiating arrogant certainty. They had backed me into a corner again. They expected me to fight, to scream, to storm out and give them the excuse they needed to disown me and crush my business. I looked down at the Persian rug. I took a slow, deep breath, forcing my shoulders to slump. I let out a defeated sigh. I looked back up at my parents, my eyes wide and submissive. I told them they won. I said I could not afford to lose my family over a building. I agreed to sign the paperwork. The tension in the room vanished, replaced by sickening, patronizing approval. My mother praised me for finally being reasonable. Marcus offered a magnanimous nod, acting the part of the gracious victor. He handed me a standard commercial sublease agreement he had already drafted. I took the document home. I did not sign it. Instead, I spent the entire night rewriting it. I crafted a temporary use agreement, heavily laden with convoluted legal jargon and dense liability clauses. Buried deep within the fine print on page 14, I inserted a stipulation granting the property owner, myself, the right to inspect the premises at any time without prior notice for safety and compliance purposes. I also included a clause stating that any illegal activity conducted on the premises would immediately void the agreement and surrender all contents to the property owner. I printed the revised document and brought it to their house the next morning. Marcus was so eager to claim his prize, so confident in his dominance, that he barely skimmed the first 2 pages. He signed his name with a flourish, handing the trap right back to me. By the end of the week, Marcus had moved his operation into my carriage house. He installed heavy blackout blinds over the windows. He changed the external locks, assuming I had no right to enter. High-end delivery trucks dropped off expensive mahogany desks, leather chairs, and filing cabinets. He brought in 2 large steel safes, which it took 4 men to carry inside. I watched from my kitchen window as expensive cars began arriving at all hours of the day and night. Men in sharp suits carrying briefcases would enter the carriage house stay for 20 minutes and leave empty-handed. It did not look like a financial advisory firm. It looked like a drop site. I was sitting in my dark living room on a Thursday night, staring at the carriage house across the driveway, trying to piece together his operation. The clock on the microwave glowed 11:45 p.m. My cell phone vibrated on the coffee table. The screen displayed an unknown caller ID. I hesitated, then answered, keeping my voice quiet. A woman spoke on the other end. Her voice was harsh, strained, and laced with panic. She did not introduce herself. She asked if I was Chloe Hastings, the owner of the property. I confirmed my identity. You need to listen to me very carefully, the woman whispered rapidly, the sound of traffic rushing in the background. You think your brother-in-law is just a bad investment manager. You think he is just moving money around to pay for your sister's shoes. I asked her who she was and how she got my number. She ignored the question. Her breathing was ragged. You are playing a very dangerous game, letting him operate on your land. You have no idea what your brother-in-law is actually storing in that carriage house. If the feds raid that building while your name is on the deed, you are going down with him. You need to get inside that vault before Tuesday." The line went dead. I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at the darkened screen. The silence in my house felt suffocating. Marcus was not just a thief. He had dragged something much darker onto my property, and the countdown had just started. The anonymous phone call shattered any illusion I had left. Marcus was not just a greedy brother-in-law coasting on my family's wealth. He was operating a criminal enterprise on my property, and the anonymous caller warned me a federal raid was imminent. I checked the clock. It was past midnight. The carriage house stood dark and silent across the driveway. The temporary use agreement I drafted gave me the legal right to inspect the premises, but I knew walking through the front door during business hours would yield nothing. Marcus would ensure his secrets were hidden. I needed to see what he was protecting when he thought no one was watching. I dressed in dark clothing and slipped out my back door. The air was cold, biting at my skin as I crossed the wet grass. Marcus had changed the exterior locks, assuming that would keep me out. I underestimated my profession. As an antique restorer, I spent my life dismantling complex centuries-old mechanisms without leaving a trace. A modern commercial deadbolt took me less than 3 minutes to bypass using a tension wrench and a standard pick set. The lock clicked. I eased the heavy oak door open and stepped inside, shutting it silently behind me. The interior of my carriage house was unrecognizable. The restoration tables and tool racks were gone. In their place stood a maze of sleek modern filing cabinets and 2 massive steel safes anchoring the back wall. The air felt stale, smelling faintly of ozone and cheap cigars. I switched on a small pen light, shielding the beam with my hand to prevent the glow from escaping through the cracks in the blackout blinds. I bypassed the decoy desks near the entrance and moved straight for the filing cabinets in the rear office. The drawers were locked, but they were cheap, mass-produced units. A quick manipulation of the internal catch mechanism popped the top drawer open. I shone my light inside. I expected to find stolen antiques or maybe fenced jewelry. Instead, I found paper, reams of it. I pulled out a thick ledger and opened it on the desk. The columns were filled with names, dates, and staggering financial figures. I recognized some of the names. They belonged to my parents' wealthy friends from the country club. I pulled out a second ledger from a different folder. The names matched, but the numbers were entirely different. Marcus was keeping 2 sets of books. The first ledger showed massive returns, consistent growth, and high-yield dividends. This was the fairy tale he showed his investors. The second ledger told the truth. It detailed a massive hemorrhage of funds, showing money constantly moving between shell companies in Delaware and offshore accounts in the Caymans. There was no real investment strategy. He was paying off early investors with the capital raised from new ones. I was running a classic sprawling Ponzi scheme, and my parents were his primary guarantors. I dug deeper into the bottom drawer. I found a stack of encrypted hard drives and a plastic bin filled with hundreds of prepaid burner phones. Marcus was not just scamming country club socialites. The burner phones indicated he was moving dirty cash for people who did not use banks. He was washing money. My carriage house was a laundromat for illicit funds. A sharp metallic click echoed through the silent building. My blood ran cold. The sound came from the front door. Someone was unlocking the deadbolt. I snapped my pen light off, plunging the room into darkness. Heavy footsteps thudded against the hardwood floor. I heard the low murmur of male voices. It was not just Marcus. He had brought company. I scanned the dark office frantically. The only exit was the front door. The windows were sealed shut by the heavy blinds. There was nowhere to run. I shoved the ledgers back into the drawer and eased it shut. I dropped to my knees and crawled toward the back corner of the room, squeezing myself into the narrow gap between the wall and a large wooden shipping crate Marcus had not yet unpacked. I pulled my knees tight to my chest, making myself as small as possible, and held my breath. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered on, flooding the space with harsh white illumination. Through a crack in the wooden slats, I saw Marcus walk into the rear office. He was followed by 2 men wearing expensive, poorly fitting suits. They did not look like financial advisors. They moved with the tense, coiled energy of men who solved problems with violence. Marcus walked straight to the steel safe. He punched in a code and spun the heavy wheel. The door groaned open. "The heat is turning up," Marcus said, his voice stripped of its usual smooth charm. It sounded tight, anxious. The SEC is sniffing around the Delaware LLCs. We need to accelerate the timeline. One of the men leans against the desk, crossing his thick arms. You promised the boss clean funds by Friday, Hayes. The man growled, his tone menacing. $2 million, washed and ready to transfer. He doesn't care about your SEC problem. He only cares about his money. If that wire does not clear, you know what happens next. Marcus pulled a heavy duffel bag from the safe and tossed it onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thud. It is all here, Marcus replied, unzipping the bag to reveal stacks of shrink-wrapped cash. I will structure the deposits through the shell accounts tomorrow. The funds will be clean and wired to your offshore account by Thursday night. Just keep your boss off my back. The men inspected the cash, nodding in grim satisfaction. They warned Marcus not to make any mistakes. They told him he was out of second chances. They zipped the bag shut and walked out of the office. Marcus followed them to the front door, locking the deadbolt behind them. I remained wedged behind the crate, my muscles cramping, my heart pounding so hard I thought the sound would betray me. I waited for Marcus to leave. I waited for over an hour, listening to him shuffle papers and make hushed phone calls in the dark. Finally, I heard the click of the lock and the sound of his car engine fading down the driveway. I stayed hidden for another 30 minutes to be certain the coast was clear. When I finally crawled out from behind the crate, my legs were numb and shaking. I slipped out of the carriage house and ran back to my home under the cover of darkness. I had uncovered the full scope of his operation. Marcus was drowning in debt, running a Ponzi scheme, and laundering millions for dangerous criminals. I was holding a secret that could get me killed. I locked my doors, checked all my windows, and sat on my sofa until the sun came up. I needed to move fast. I needed to take the ledgers and the hard drive straight to the FBI before Marcus executed his final transfer. I grabbed my car keys, ready to drive back to the carriage house and retrieve the evidence. A sharp, authoritative knock hammered against my front door. I jumped, my nerves already frayed. I looked through the peephole. Standing on my porch were 2 uniformed police officers and a man wearing a plain suit holding a badge. I opened the door cautiously. Chloe Hastings, the man in the suit, asked, his tone clipped and official. I am Detective Miller, Financial Crimes Division. We need you to step outside. I asked him what this was about. We received an anonymous tip early this morning. The detective stated, his eyes cold and assessing. The informant provided credible evidence linking you to a significant wire fraud operation and the theft of commercial assets. We have a warrant to search your residence and your business properties. My stomach plummeted. I looked past the detective and saw Marcus standing at the end of my driveway. He was holding a cup of coffee, watching the scene unfold with a look of feigned concern. He caught my eye and offered a slow, deliberate smirk. The anonymous caller from the night before had not been a warning. It had been a test, and Marcus had orchestrated the entire thing. He knew I would break in. He knew I would find the evidence. He had moved faster than I did. He had planted the stolen funds in my name and called the police himself. The trap had not been for him. The trap had been for me. Detective Miller pushed past me into the foyer, his team fanning out through my house. They moved with clinical efficiency, opening drawers, pulling books from shelves, and scanning documents. I stood by the front door, my arms crossed, watching them tear my life apart. I kept my face blank. I did not protest. I did not ask questions. Panic is an admission of guilt. Marcus remained at the end of the driveway, sipping his coffee, playing the role of the concerned brother-in-law for the benefit of the neighbors who were beginning to peek out of their windows. He had framed the narrative perfectly. An anonymous tip, a sudden police raid, the disgraced business owner caught red-handed. But Marcus had made one critical miscalculation. He assumed I was as careless as he was. When I returned from the carriage house the night before, my nerves shattered and adrenaline pumping, I did not just sit on the sofa. I had recognized the danger of possessing raw physical evidence against a man who laundered money for organized crime. I knew that keeping the ledgers or hard drives in my home was a death sentence. Before the sun rose, I had photographed every page of the physical ledger using a high-resolution scanner app. I uploaded the encrypted files to a secure offshore cloud server. Then I burned the original documents in my fireplace, crushing the ashes into fine dust and washing them down the drain. I shattered the hard drives with a hammer, mixed the fragments with construction debris, and dumped them into a commercial dumpster 3 miles away. The police searched for 4 hours. They found nothing. No ledgers, no hard drives, no burner phones. Detective Miller emerged from my home office, his expression tight with frustration. He handed me back my phone and my laptop, which his tech team had cloned and analyzed on site. "We are done here for now," the detective said, his tone making it clear he was not finished with me. The tip we received lacked corroborating physical evidence on the premises. However, the investigation into the commercial fraud associated with your properties remains open. Do not leave the state. The police cruisers pulled out of my driveway. Marcus watched them leave. His confident smirk faltered, replaced by a momentary flicker of confusion. He had expected to see me let out in handcuffs. I stood on my porch, met his gaze, and slowly closed the front door. I had survived the raid, but survival is not a victory. The damage was already done. Police raids in affluent suburbs do not stay quiet. By noon, local news blogs had picked up the story. Prominent antique appraiser investigated in wire fraud probe. The headline was a death knell for my reputation. In my industry, trust is the only currency that matters. My clients were wealthy private individuals who abhorred scandal. By 3 o'clock, my phone began ringing. 3 high-profile clients canceled their restoration contracts, demanding the immediate return of their inventory. The silence from the rest was worse. My business, built over a decade of meticulous, honest work, was hemorrhaging credibility. At 5 o'clock, my father called. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not ask for my side of the story. His voice cut through the line like a whip. "You have disgraced this family, Chloe," he snarled, the contempt dripping from every syllable. "The country club is buzzing with rumors about your police raid. Your mother is inconsolable. We warned you that your jealousy toward Marcus would ruin you. You have brought this shame entirely upon yourself." I tried to tell him that Marcus had orchestrated the raid, that Marcus was the one running a fraudulent enterprise. My father cut me off, his voice rising to a shout. "Do not drag your brother-in-law into your mess. Marcus is currently negotiating a major expansion for his fund. He is securing our financial future while you are facing criminal charges. You are a liability. You are forbidden from attending Thanksgiving dinner next week. We will not have you parading your scandal in front of our guests. Do not contact us again until you have cleared your name, assuming that is even possible." He hung up. The dial tone buzzed harsh and final. I was entirely alone. My business was collapsing. My family had disowned me. I had digital copies of Marcus's ledgers, but they were legally useless. Any defense attorney would argue they were illegally obtained, manipulated, or fabricated by a vindictive sister-in-law. Without physical proof or a corroborating witness, taking those files to the authorities would only result in my arrest for corporate espionage and breaking and entering. Marcus had won. He had successfully isolated me, destroyed my credibility, and shielded his operation behind my parents' vanity. I sank onto my sofa, staring at the blank television screen. The walls of my house felt suffocating. I had fought so hard, played every angle, and still ended up trapped. The exhaustion settled deep in my bones. I had no moves left to play. A dull thump sounded from the front porch. The mail carrier was running late. I dragged myself up from the sofa and opened the front door. The sun was setting, casting long, dark shadows across the driveway. A plain, brown padded envelope sat on the welcome mat. There was no return address, no postage. It had been hand-delivered. I picked it up. It felt light, containing only a small, hard object. I brought it inside, locked the door, and tore open the flap. A silver USB drive slid out, clattering onto the kitchen counter. A piece of lined notebook paper fluttered down beside it. The handwriting was sharp, precise, and written in dark blue ink. I picked up the note and read the single paragraph. "I have sat on my porch every evening for the last 5 years. I prefer the fresh air to television. I also prefer security. My 4K resolution motion-activated surveillance cameras cover every inch of my property, which happens to include an unobstructed view of your entire driveway and the front doors of your carriage house. I saw the police raid this morning. I know a frame job when I see one. I see everything." The note was signed simply, Mrs. Gable. I stared at the name. Mrs. Gable was my 72-year-old neighbor. She lived in the Victorian house directly across the street. She was a quiet, unassuming woman who spent her days tending to her immaculate rose bushes and her evenings sitting in a rocking chair on her wraparound porch. I knew very little about her other than the neighborhood rumor that she was a retired military data analyst. I had always assumed she was just a lonely widow watching the neighborhood go by. I looked at the silver USB drive resting on the counter. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a surge of pure electric adrenaline. The digital ledgers I possessed showed the financial crimes, but they could not prove who was physically moving the assets. I lacked the smoking gun connecting Marcus to the stolen antiques and the illicit cash drops. I grabbed my laptop, my hands trembling as I plugged the USB drive into the port. A folder popped up on the screen. It was labeled simply, Carriage House Security Logs. I clicked open the folder. The screen populated with dozens of high-definition video files. They were organized meticulously by date and time spanning back several months. Mrs. Gable had not just captured a few random events. She had documented a complete, unbroken visual history of every person who had entered and exited my property. I double-clicked the first video file. The media player launched, filling the screen with crystal-clear footage. The trap I had been trying to build for Marcus had just been handed to me fully armed and ready to detonate. I clicked the mouse. The screen illuminated my dark kitchen. 38 folders populated the window. Mrs. Gable had labeled each one with military precision. Year, month, day, exact military time. I opened the first folder. The media player launched. The footage was in 4K resolution, sharp enough to read the manufacturer label on the padlock hanging off my carriage house door. Timestamp 02:14 hours. The motion sensor light flared on. A figure stepped into the frame. It was Harper. She wore a silk trench coat and the same designer boots she paraded at Sunday brunches. She unlocked the carriage house with her spare key. 3 minutes later, she emerged carrying the 18th century French enamel clock. She struggled with the weight her face contorted in exertion. I watched my own sister shove a priceless artifact into the trunk of her luxury sedan. She did not look guilty. She looked annoyed by the physical labor of stealing from me. I clicked through the timeline, watching the escalation. Folder 10 showed a different kind of theft. It was late afternoon. Marcus stood in the driveway. A black SUV pulled up, tires crunching on the gravel. 2 men stepped out. I recognized them immediately as the enforcers I had hidden from inside the carriage house. The camera angle captured their faces with terrifying clarity. It captured the license plate of the SUV. The men unloaded 2 heavy steel safes from the vehicle. Marcus directed them inside. This was the physical proof the authorities needed. The digital ledgers showed the money moving, but this footage proved Marcus was physically receiving illicit funds on my property. It tied the white-collar crime to organized syndicate activity. I scrolled to the very bottom of the directory. Folder 38. The timestamp indicated it was recorded 3 weeks ago during the same weekend my parents had forced me to sign the temporary use agreement for Marcus. I pressed play. The video started in broad daylight. A silver Lexus SUV pulled into my driveway. I knew that car. It belonged to my father. My breath caught in my throat. I leaned closer to the screen. My father stepped out of the driver's seat. He was wearing his weekend golf attire and brown leather driving gloves. My mother emerged from the passenger side, adjusting her sunglasses. They walked up to the carriage house. Marcus met them at the door, handing my father a set of keys. I watched in stunned, paralyzing silence as my father unlocked the door. He and Marcus walked inside. A few moments later, they re-emerged carrying the restored mahogany writing desk. The desk belonged to my business inventory. It was a piece I had spent 4 months meticulously restoring by hand. My father guided the heavy desk toward the back of his Lexus. My mother held the trunk open, clearing space among her shopping bags. She was smiling. She patted Marcus on the arm, a gesture of warm maternal affection. They loaded the stolen desk into their vehicle. They stood in my driveway, laughing, chatting like they had just picked up a bargain at a Sunday flea market. They hugged Marcus goodbye and drove away with my livelihood sitting in their trunk. I let the video loop. I watched it play 3 times. The man who constantly lectured me about family honor and social standing was acting as a common fence for stolen goods. The woman who demanded I apologize to Marcus to save the family reputation was holding the door open while they robbed me blind. They were not merely blind to his crimes, they were active accomplices. They had decided my business was acceptable collateral damage to maintain their golden son-in-law and his failing empire. The tight, suffocating knot of anxiety that had gripped my chest for months suddenly vanished. The lingering guilt I felt over potentially ruining my parents evaporated, leaving behind a cold, clinical void. I realized I had been fighting to save people who were actively digging my grave. I closed the media player. I ejected the USB drive and gripped it in my palm. The metal felt cool against my skin. I did not shed a single tear. Crying requires a sense of loss, and you cannot lose people who were never really yours. I picked up my phone. I did not search for a civil litigator. Civil court is for disputes over property lines and contract breaches. I needed a predator. I searched the state registry for the most ruthless white-collar criminal defense and prosecution liaison in New Jersey. I found a name, Silas Thorne. He was a former federal prosecutor who had built a lucrative private practice dismantling corporate fraud rings. I called his emergency after-hours line. A paralegal answered and tried to brush me off, telling me to schedule a consultation for next week. I informed the paralegal I possessed high-definition surveillance footage and offshore digital ledgers, tying a local investment fund to a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme and cartel money laundering. I told him the perpetrators were currently attempting to pin the operation on me. Silas Thorne picked up the line 10 seconds later. His voice was gravelly sharp and impatient. He asked me to verify my claims. I sent him a secure encrypted link containing the digital ledger screenshots and one video file from Mrs. Gable showing the men unloading the steel safes. I waited on the line while he reviewed the files. I heard the rhythmic tapping of his keyboard through the speaker. After 2 minutes, the tapping stopped. Miss Hastings Silas said, his tone entirely transformed into stark professionalism. "You are holding a live grenade. The FBI Financial Crimes Division will salivate over this. We can file an injunction tomorrow to halt the bank foreclosure on your property and sue your family in civil court for damages." I stared at the dark screen of my laptop. "We are not suing civilly," I told him, my voice dropping to a low, quiet register. "I do not want their money. I do not want an injunction. Civil court gives them a chance to settle. It gives them a chance to use their country club connections to sweep this under the rug. I want them in handcuffs." Silas went silent for a moment. Then a low hum of approval sounded in his throat. "You want to drop a net. I want to catch them all," I confirmed. "My sister, my brother-in-law, my parents. Every single one of them who touched my property. If we hand this to the feds right now," Silas explained, moving into tactical mode, "Marcus will claim the footage is circumstantial. He will say he was just storing items. Your parents will play dumb and claim they were just borrowing furniture. We have the ledgers, but defense attorneys can tie up digital evidence in discovery for years. If you want a flawless execution, we need them to authenticate their own guilt. We need them to legally tie themselves to the stolen assets and the fraudulent funds simultaneously on the record with witnesses." I asked him how we accomplish that. "We need to lure them into a room," Silas said. "We need them feeling so victorious, so arrogant that they sign their names to a document claiming ownership of your business and the carriage house assets. Once they claim the kingdom, they claim the treason. But getting people that paranoid into one room requires bait." I looked at the silver USB drive resting on my desk. I knew exactly what bait to use. I knew exactly how to make them run toward their own execution. I would give them exactly what they had been demanding from the very beginning: my absolute unconditional surrender. The next morning, I stood in my kitchen staring at my phone. The plan Silas laid out required me to perform the most humiliating role of my life. I had to convince my family I was utterly broken, financially ruined, and begging for their mercy. I took a deep breath, pinched the bridge of my nose to force a tremor into my voice, and dialed my parents' home number. My mother answered on the 4th ring. Her tone was sharp-guarded. I did not give her a chance to speak. I launched into a frantic, tearful monologue. I told her the police raid had destroyed my business. I confessed that my clients had abandoned me, and the bank was threatening immediate foreclosure on my entire property, not just the carriage house. I let out a choked sob, admitting I had no money left to fight Marcus or anyone else. "I need help, Mom," I pleaded, making sure my voice cracked perfectly. "I was wrong about Marcus. I was just stressed and jealous. Please, I do not want to lose my house. I will do whatever it takes to fix this." The silence on the line was thick with calculated triumph. I could practically hear my mother smiling. She told me to hold the line. She covered the receiver, but I could hear muffled, urgent voices in the background. She was conferring with my father, and undoubtedly Marcus, who practically lived at their estate now. When she returned, her voice dripped with condescending magnanimity. "Your father and I have discussed your situation, Chloe," she announced. "We are deeply disappointed in your erratic behavior, but family takes care of family. Marcus has graciously offered to intervene and manage your looming debts provided you are willing to cooperate fully." I agreed instantly, thanking her profusely, playing the pathetic, grateful daughter they always wanted me to be. My mother instructed me to attend a formal mediation session at their family attorney's office the following Friday. She warned me that this was my final chance to avoid bankruptcy and criminal charges for slandering Marcus. I hung up the phone. The tears dried instantly. My face felt cold. They had taken the bait without a single moment of hesitation. They were so blinded by their own arrogance and greed that they could not see the steel jaws of the trap opening beneath them. The mediation was set for Friday. I had exactly 7 days to prepare the execution. I drove into Manhattan to meet Silas Thorne at his office. The space was austere, designed for efficiency rather than intimidation. Silas sat behind a clean desk, reviewing the complete dossier of evidence I had provided. We did not discuss civil suits. We discussed federal indictments. Silas had already bypassed local law enforcement. I knew local police departments could be slow, bureaucratic, and vulnerable to the influence of wealthy suburban families. He went straight to his contacts within the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Section and the Internal Revenue Service's Criminal Investigation Division. The FBI reviewed the video footage from Mrs. Gable. The visual confirmation of known syndicate enforcers delivering safes to my property elevated the case from a local fraud dispute to a federal racketeering and money laundering investigation. The IRS reviewed the digital ledgers comparing Marcus's offshore shell companies against his reported income. The tax evasion alone carried a mandatory minimum sentence. Silas arranged a secure meeting in a windowless room at the federal building. 2 FBI special agents and an IRS investigator sat across from me. They did not treat me like a suspect. They treated me like a highly valuable cooperating witness. I handed over the original USB drive containing the 38 videos and the encrypted access keys to the cloud server holding the ledgers. The lead FBI agent, a woman with sharp analytical eyes, explained the tactical situation. They had enough to raid Marcus's operation, but raiding the carriage house now would only scatter the cockroaches. Marcus would claim ignorance. My parents would hire expensive lawyers and tie the evidence up in court, arguing the documents were planted. "We need them to claim ownership of the criminal enterprise," the agent stated, leaning forward. "We need Marcus and your family to sign legal documents asserting full administrative control over your property and your business assets. If they sign a contract taking control of the carriage house to settle your debts, they legally assume liability for everything inside it at the time of the transfer." I told her about the mediation scheduled for Friday. I explained my family's plan to force me to sign over my business and real estate to Marcus in exchange for dropping their fabricated slander threats. The agent exchanged a glance with Silas. A grim smile touched her lips. "That is the kill shot," she said. "Let them present the contract. Let them force you to sign it. The moment their signatures dry on that paper, they are legally binding themselves to a multi-million-dollar money laundering operation." The next 5 days were an agonizing exercise in discipline. I maintained absolute radio silence with my family. I did not log into social media. I stayed inside my house, ignoring the frantic calls from vendors and the increasingly threatening letters from the bank regarding the forged loan. I had to let the chaos swirl around me to make my desperation look authentic. While I waited, Silas executed the final crucial step to protect my legitimate assets. He set up an anonymous, irrevocable blind trust based in Wyoming. Under the radar of the local courts, I legally transferred the ownership of my remaining cash, my personal antique collection, and my intellectual property rights into the trust. By the time Friday arrived, Chloe Hastings, the individual, was legally penniless. I had nothing left to lose, making the contract my family was preparing entirely worthless, except as an admission of their own guilt. Thursday night, the eve of the mediation, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A text message illuminated the screen. It was from Harper. She had sent a photo of herself getting a manicure, a glass of champagne resting next to her hand. The text read, "Try to look presentable tomorrow. Marcus is doing you a massive favor keeping you out of jail. Prepare to pack your bags and move out of the house by Monday." I stared at the message. Harper was gloating, eager to watch me sign away my home and my business so she could continue funding her luxury lifestyle. She had no idea she was texting a ghost. She had no idea that while she was picking out nail polish, federal agents were finalizing the tactical layout for a coordinated strike. I did not reply. I locked my phone, set it on the counter, and walked into my bedroom to select a suit for the mediation. I chose dark gray, tailored and severe. I needed to look like a woman going to a funeral. I needed them to believe they were attending my burial, completely unaware that I had spent the last 7 days digging a mass grave for all of them. The law offices of Sterling and Vance occupied the top floor of a glass tower in downtown Newark. The elevator ride felt agonizingly slow. I stood staring at my reflection in the polished brass doors, adjusting the collar of my dark gray suit. I carried a single leather tote bag. Inside sat my laptop, a portable mini projector, and a folder containing the blank Wyoming trust documents. I did not bring a lawyer. Showing up alone was the final touch required to sell my total defeat. The receptionist, a young woman with a tight smile, escorted me down a quiet corridor lined with expensive modern art. She opened the heavy frosted glass doors to the main conference room. The scene inside was exactly as I had anticipated. They had arranged themselves to maximize intimidation. My father sat at the head of the massive mahogany table wearing his Navy power suit, looking every bit the disappointed patriarch. My mother sat to his right, her posture rigid, her hands folded over a designer handbag. Harper and Marcus sat together on the left. Harper was actively scrolling on her phone, looking profoundly bored by my presence. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, a picture of arrogant relaxation. Sitting across from them was Richard Sterling, the family's primary corporate attorney. He was a sharp-featured man in his late 50s who specialized in aggressive asset acquisition. He looked at me with cold, professional disdain. I took the single empty chair at the far end of the table. I placed my leather tote bag on the floor next to my feet. I kept my head slightly bowed, avoiding direct eye contact. "Glad you decided to be reasonable, Chloe." My father began, his voice echoing in the large room. "This entire ordeal has been deeply embarrassing for the family. We are here to clean up your mess and ensure Marcus can continue operating without your constant paranoid interference." Richard Sterling slid a thick bound document across the polished wood. It stopped directly in front of me. "This is a comprehensive asset transfer and debt assumption agreement," the attorney stated, tapping the cover with a silver pen. "In exchange for Marcus assuming the commercial liabilities you currently face, including the pending foreclosure on your property, you will sign over the deed to the carriage house, the surrounding acreage, and all remaining inventory within your restoration business. You will also sign a non-disclosure agreement preventing you from making any further defamatory statements regarding Marcus or his investment fund." Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He offered a smile that dripped with condescending victory. "Sign the papers, Chloe," he said, his tone slick and magnanimous. "Hand over the keys. If you cooperate, I might even let you stay on as a junior assistant in my new office. You can make the coffee." Harper let out a sharp, mocking laugh. My mother shot her a warning glance but quickly returned her severe gaze to me. "This is a hard lesson in consequences," my mother added, her voice devoid of any maternal warmth. "You chose to be selfish. You chose to attack your sister's husband. You are lucky Marcus is willing to salvage your reputation at all. Sign the document, and we can put this ugly chapter behind us." I looked down at the 50-page contract. It was a masterclass in legal theft. By signing it, I would voluntarily surrender my entire livelihood to a criminal, effectively making myself destitute while shielding his money laundering operation under a veil of legal transfer. They expected me to pick up the silver pen, cry a few tears of defeat, and sign my life away. I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I reached down into my leather tote bag. I pulled out my laptop and set it on the table. I retrieved the mini projector and connected the HDMI cable. Richard Sterling frowned, his professional demeanor slipping into annoyance. "Miss Hastings, this is a formal legal mediation. What are you doing?" I ignored him. I powered on the projector and aimed the lens at the blank white wall behind my father. I opened the media folder on my desktop. "Before I sign anything," I said, keeping my voice quiet and deferential, "do all a short presentation. Consider it a visual inventory of the assets you are acquiring today. I just want to ensure everyone is fully aware of what is currently stored on my property before the legal transfer is finalized." My father sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "We do not have time for a slideshow, Chloe. Just sign the damn papers." Marcus waved a dismissive hand. "Let her play her little video, Richard. If it makes her feel better about handing over the keys, let her have her moment." That was all the permission I needed. I clicked the mouse. The projector flared to life. A high-definition image filled the wall, expanding to an 85-inch display. The room went silent. The video did not show antique furniture or architectural blueprints. The footage began playing timestamp 10:14 hours. The black SUV pulled into my driveway. The high-resolution camera captured the license plate perfectly. Marcus appeared on screen, stepping out of the carriage house. The two cartel enforcers exited the vehicle. The camera zoomed in, capturing their faces with terrifying clarity as they unloaded the heavy steel safes and hauled them into the building under Marcus's direct supervision. The smug, arrogant smile vanished from Marcus's face as if it had been wiped away by a physical blow. He shot up from his leather chair, the heavy wood scraping violently against the floor. "What the hell is this?" Marcus shouted, panic instantly replacing his polished charm. "Where did you get this footage? Shut that off right now." Richard Sterling looked at the screen, then at Marcus, his sharp legal mind instantly recognizing the severe implications of the video. He reached across the table, trying to slam my laptop shut. I pulled the laptop back, keeping the projection running. I clicked the spacebar, skipping to the next file. The video cut to a different angle, recorded at night. The harsh glare of the motion sensor light illuminated the driveway. The footage showed Marcus accepting a heavy duffel bag from a different man, exchanging brief words and carrying the bag inside. Harper gasped, her hands flying to cover her mouth. She stared at the screen, her eyes wide with shock. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Who are those men? What is in that bag?" Marcus ignored her. He lunged toward my side of the table, his fists clenched, his eyes wild with desperation. "Turn it off, Chloe. I swear to God I will ruin you." I did not flinch. I kept my hand hovering over the keyboard. I looked directly at my parents. They were staring at the wall, paralyzed by confusion and a growing sense of dread. They did not understand the criminal mechanics of what they were watching, but they recognized the visceral terror radiating from their golden son-in-law. I saved the best for last. I announced, my voice cutting through Marcus's shouting. I pressed the right arrow key, loading the final file. The screen flickered. The silver Lexus SUV pulled into the frame. My father gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles turning white. My mother gasped, a sharp intake of breath echoing in the quiet room. The 4K resolution captured my parents perfectly. It showed my father unlocking the carriage house door. It showed my mother smiling warmly at Marcus, and it clearly showed both of my parents assisting Marcus as they carried my stolen, restored mahogany writing desk out of the building and loaded it into the trunk of their luxury vehicle. The room plunged into an absolute suffocating silence. The video looped, playing the theft over and over again on the massive white wall. I looked around the mahogany table. The arrogant tribunal that had demanded my surrender just 3 minutes ago was entirely destroyed. Marcus stood frozen, breathing heavily, trapped by his own crimes. Harper stared at her husband in horror. My parents sat rigidly in their chairs, staring at their own faces projected on the wall, watching themselves commit a felony. I slowly closed the laptop. The wall went dark. I looked at the 50-page contract sitting in front of me, then pushed it back across the table toward the family attorney. "I think we need to renegotiate the terms," I said softly. The silence in the conference room was shattered by the frantic snapping of a briefcase latch. Richard Sterling, the polished, aggressive corporate attorney who had practically sneered at me 5 minutes earlier, was moving with desperate speed. He swept the 50-page asset transfer agreement off the table, shoving it into his leather satchel, along with his legal pads and silver pens. He did not look at my parents. He did not look at Marcus. He looked only at the door. "Richard, what are you doing?" My father demanded, his voice thick with confusion and rising panic. "Sit down and fix this. Threaten her with a defamation suit. Find a loophole." The attorney paused, his hand gripping the brass handle of the conference room door. He turned back, his expression drained of all professional courtesy. He looked at my father with the cold detachment of a man distancing himself from a terminal diagnosis. "I am a corporate litigator," Richard the lawyer stated, his voice tight. "I negotiate mergers and handle civil asset disputes. I do not represent clients involved in federal racketeering, grand larceny, or multi-million-dollar money laundering operations." The video she just played implicates you in the physical transport of stolen commercial property. I am formally withdrawing as your legal counsel effective immediately. Do not contact my office. He pushed through the heavy frosted glass doors and walked briskly down the hallway, abandoning them completely. The reality of the situation finally crashed down on Marcus. His veneer of arrogant control evaporated, leaving behind raw, feral desperation. His face flushed a dark, mottled red. He lunged across the mahogany table, his hands grasping for my laptop. "Where did you get this fabricated garbage?" Marcus roared, his composure entirely broken. "You think you can splice together some fake footage and blackmail me? I will destroy you, Chloe. I will drag you through court until you are begging for a plea deal." I slid the laptop smoothly out of his reach and slipped it back into my leather tote bag. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I remained seated, watching his meltdown with clinical detachment. "You cannot blackmail someone who has already pulled the trigger," Marcus, I said softly. He froze his hands, gripping the edge of the table. Those were just the highlights. I continued my tone conversational. The full, uncompressed files, all 38 folders, complete with unedited timestamps, high-resolution facial capture, and vehicular plate identification, have been sitting on the desk of a senior FBI agent in the Financial Crimes Division for exactly 72 hours. The IRS Criminal Investigation Unit currently possesses the decryption keys to your offshore cloud servers. They have your double ledgers, Marcus. They have everything. The video you just watched was just the trailer. Marcus stumbled backward, hitting the edge of his leather chair. The blood drained from his face, leaving a sickly ashen gray. He staggered against the wall, his breathing shallow and rapid. He understood the legal mechanics. He knew he was already a dead man walking. Harper remained paralyzed in her seat, staring at her husband as if a stranger had just wearing his skin. My mother broke the paralysis. She let out a piercing theatrical wail, the kind of dramatic cry she usually reserved for perceived social slights, but this time, the terror was genuine. She scrambled out of her chair, rushing around the table toward me. She did not look angry. She looked terrified. "Chloe, please." My mother pleaded, her hands reaching out to grasp my arms. I pulled back, refusing the contact. She stumbled slightly, tears ruining her immaculate makeup. "You have to stop this. You must call the FBI and tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you were confused. Marcus is your brother-in-law. He is family. You cannot send family to federal prison." My father nodded frantically, his face pale and sweating. He leaned heavily against the table for support. "We can fix the misunderstanding regarding the furniture, Chloe," he stammered, trying to reconstruct his shattered authority. "We will return the desk. We will pay you for any damages. But you must retract your statements to the authorities. A federal investigation will destroy Marcus's career. It will ruin our reputation. Think of what this will do to the family name. They were still doing it. Even after watching video evidence of Marcus laundering syndicate money, even after watching themselves commit a felony on camera, their only concern was protecting their social standing and defending the golden son-in-law. They still believed they could negotiate their way out of a federal indictment. They still believed I was the villain for exposing the rot. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. I looked at the three people who had spent 5 years treating me like a disposable asset. "Family," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "You want to talk about family loyalty? You want to talk about protecting the people you love?" I reached back into my tote bag. I did not pull out another electronic device. I pulled out a thick manila folder secured with a heavy rubber band. I tossed it onto the center of the mahogany table. It landed with a heavy, definitive slap. "Let us see exactly how the family has been treating you," I said, gesturing toward the folder. "I suggest you open that, Dad. I think you will find the contents far more interesting than my missing desk." My father stared at the manila folder as if it were a venomous snake. He hesitated, his eyes darting between me and Marcus. Marcus was still leaning against the wall, staring blankly at the carpet, completely unresponsive. My father reached out with a trembling hand and pulled off the rubber band. He flipped open the cover. Inside sat a comprehensive 50-page report compiled by the forensic accounting firm Silas Thorne had hired. It was not a report analyzing my business. It was a deep dive into the financial architecture of Hayes Vanguard Capital, specifically focusing on the guarantor accounts. My father picked up the first page, his eyes scanning the executive summary. His brow furrowed in confusion, which quickly twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. He dropped the page as if it had burned his fingers. He picked up the next page, then the next, reading the highlighted figures with mounting panic. "Richard," my mother asked, her voice trembling. "Richard, what is it? What does it say?" He did not answer her. He could not speak. He just kept staring at the financial ruin documented in black and white. I walked slowly around the table, stopping directly behind my mother's chair. "Your golden son-in-law does not manage a hedge fund," I explained, breaking down the forensic report for the room. "He does not manage high-yield portfolios for your country club friends. He runs a massive, aggressive Ponzi scheme. He has been using new investor money to pay off the old ones while skimming millions off the top to fund Harper's designer lifestyle and pay his syndicate handlers." My mother shook her head violently, refusing to accept reality. "That is a lie. Marcus is a brilliant advisor. He doubled our retirement portfolio last year. We saw the statements." "Those statements were forged," I stated coldly. "The offshore accounts are empty. The Delaware LLCs are hollow shells. But that is not the worst part, Mom. The worst part is how he kept the illusion alive when the cash flow slowed down." I pointed at the thick folder resting in front of my father. "Marcus needed constant liquidity to keep the scheme running and to pay off the dangerous people he was washing money for," I continued. "He did not use his own assets. He used the primary guarantors. He used the people who signed their names to his credit lines because they trusted him blindly. He used you." My father finally found his voice. It sounded like gravel scraping against a tin roof. "The house," my father whispered, staring blankly at the polished wood table. "He remortgaged the Beacon Hill estate 3 times. Harper snapped her head up, staring at her father in shock. "What, Dad? What are you talking about?" I stepped back, allowing the devastation to fully settle over the room. "He drained your retirement accounts," I confirmed, delivering the final fatal blow. "He liquidated your stock options. He leveraged your entire estate to the absolute maximum limit. The banks are preparing to initiate foreclosure proceedings on your mansion by the end of the month. You do not own that house anymore. You do not own anything. Marcus did not just steal a desk from me. He stole your entire life savings to cover his gambling debts and pay off the cartel. You are completely, irrevocably bankrupt." The word bankrupt hung in the sterile air of the conference room, heavy and absolute. My father stared at the forensic report, his eyes scanning the columns of red ink. The numbers detailed the systematic dismantling of his entire legacy. He saw the forged signatures authorizing equity lines against his Beacon Hill estate. He saw the systematic draining of his retirement accounts, the funds transferred into phantom offshore LLCs. The financial stability he had spent 40 years building, the wealth he used to command obedience and project superiority, was gone. He let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. He dropped the paper, his hands trembling violently. He collapsed backward into his leather chair, clutching his chest. His breathing turned ragged, shallow. The arrogance that usually defined his posture melted away, leaving a frail, terrified old man staring into an abyss. My mother remained frozen for exactly 3 seconds. The reality of her impending poverty hit her like a physical blow. The country club memberships, the charity galas, the designer wardrobe, everything that constructed her identity had just been vaporized. She turned slowly toward Marcus. Marcus was still leaning against the wall, his eyes fixed on the floor, sweat beading on his forehead. He did not look like a master manipulator anymore. He looked like a cornered animal realizing the trap had sprung. "You stole our house," my mother whispered, her voice trembling with a terrifying quiet fury. "You took our retirement." Marcus swallowed hard, refusing to meet her gaze. "Diane, listen to me." He started raising his hands in a weak, placating gesture. The market took an unexpected downturn. The crypto investments cratered. I needed liquidity to cover the margin calls. It was a temporary bridge loan. I was going to replace the funds before the end of the quarter. I swear. "Temporary!" My mother shrieked, the volume of her voice shattering the quiet office environment. "You remortgaged my home 3 times. You told us those documents were standard guarantor renewals for your expansion. You swore you were using the equity to crush Chloe's business. You said it was a necessary strategy to protect the family name from her erratic behavior. The admission slipped out in her rage. They had knowingly authorized Marcus to use their financial leverage to destroy me. They thought they were funding a war against an ungrateful daughter. They never realized they were handing a pyromaniac the matches to burn down their own house. I stood near the door watching the implosion. I felt no pity. Pity is reserved for victims. These people were willing participants who got caught in the crossfire of their own malice. Harper, who had been sitting in stunned silence, finally processed the magnitude of the situation. Her perfect manicured life was built on a foundation of stolen money, and the floor had just dropped out. "Marcus, tell me she is lying," Harper demanded, her voice shrill and desperate. "Tell me you did not lose our money. Tell me my accounts are fine." Marcus looked at his wife, his expression hardening into cold resentment. "Your accounts," he scoffed, his voice laced with bitter exhaustion. "Your accounts are frozen, Harper. The feds locked everything down this morning while you were getting your nails done. The Porsche is leased. The Maldives trip was charged to a corporate card that is currently bouncing. You do not own anything. You never did. You just spent it faster than I could steal it." Harper let out a high, panicked wail. She scrambled out of her chair, lunging toward Marcus. "You lied to me. You told me you were a genius. You told me we were rich." She began pounding her fists against his chest, her designer rings catching on his suit jacket. Marcus grabbed her wrists, shoving her back forcefully. Harper stumbled, hitting the edge of the conference table. My mother snapped. The loss of her wealth, the betrayal by her golden son-in-law, and the sheer humiliation of the situation broke whatever remained of her composure. She rounded the table, her face contorted in absolute rage. She did not aim for Marcus. She aimed for the daughter who had brought him into their lives. My mother raised her hand and delivered a vicious, open-palmed slap across Harper's face. The crack of skin against skin echoed sharply. Harper cried out, stumbling backward, clutching her stinging cheek. She stared at her mother in pure, unadulterated shock. "This is your fault," my mother screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Harper. "You brought this criminal into our home. You demanded the expensive wedding. You demanded the lifestyle. You convinced us he was a prodigy, and we trusted you. You let him destroy us." "Mom, I did not know." Harper sobbed, backing away, her eyes wide with terror. "I swear I had no idea." "You are a fool," my mother spat, stepping closer, her voice thick with venom. "You paraded around in diamonds while he was stealing the roof over our heads. You are just as useless as your sister. I watched the family eat itself alive." The carefully constructed facade of upper-class superiority had dissolved into a vicious, ugly brawl over money and blame. They were turning on each other with the same ruthless cruelty they had always reserved for me. My father remained slumped in his chair, his face gray, his breathing labored. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "Chloe," he rasped, his voice weak and unsteady. "Please, you have to stop the FBI. If they audit my accounts, they will see my signature on the guarantor forms. They will think I was a willing participant in the fraud. I will be indicted. I will go to prison." I picked up my leather tote bag and slung it over my shoulder. I looked at the man who had threatened to bankrupt my business just a few weeks prior. "I am not the one prosecuting you, Dad," I said, calmly adjusting the strap of my bag. "I am merely a cooperating witness in a federal investigation. You signed the documents. You authorized the equity lines. You helped Marcus load stolen commercial property into the trunk of your luxury vehicle. You are an accessory to grand larceny and wire fraud." My father closed his eyes, a single tear leaking out and tracking through the deep wrinkles on his face. "I cannot go to prison," he whispered brokenly. "I am too old. I will not survive it." I looked at the 50-page asset transfer agreement still sitting on the table, the contract designed to leave me destitute. "You should have read the fine print before you tried to ruin my life," I replied, my voice devoid of any sympathy. I turned my back on the chaos. I walked toward the frosted glass doors, ready to leave them to their destruction. A heavy metallic thud sounded from the hallway outside. I paused, my hand resting on the brass door handle. The heavy oak doors of the law firm's main entrance crashed open. The sound of heavy boots hitting the polished marble floors echoed down the corridor, moving rapidly toward the conference room. Marcus jerked his head toward the door, his eyes wide with renewed panic. The blood drained completely from his face. He recognized the sound. It was not the rhythmic, measured tread of corporate lawyers. It was the synchronized tactical movement of a raid team. The frosted glass doors of the conference room swung open violently, hitting the interior walls with a sharp crack. 3 men stepped into the room. They were wearing dark tactical vests emblazoned with bright yellow letters FBI. A tall, broad-shouldered special agent stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room quickly before locking onto Marcus. Marcus Hayes, the agent asked, his voice booming with absolute, uncompromising authority. Marcus backed away, hitting the wall. He raised his hands, instinctively trembling. The agent did not wait for confirmation. He stepped forward, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. Marcus Hayes, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and violation of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. You have the right to remain silent. The final act had begun, and no amount of country club influence could stop the inevitable. The heavy steel handcuffs clicked shut around Marcus's wrists. The sound was sharp, metallic, and utterly definitive. Marcus twisted violently, straining against the grip of the 2 federal agents flanking him. His face, usually arranged in a mask of untouchable superiority, was contorted in sheer panic. He bared his teeth, looking wildly around the room as if searching for an escape route that did not exist. "This is a misunderstanding," Marcus shouted, his voice cracking, losing its smooth baritone resonance. "I demand to speak to my attorney. You have no authorization for this." The lead agent, a man whose expression remained entirely unbothered by the outburst, pulled a folded piece of paper from his tactical vest. "We have a federal warrant signed by a district judge, Mr. Hayes. Your offshore accounts have been seized. The Delaware LLCs are frozen. Your associates in the syndicate are currently being processed in a separate raid. You are out of moves." Harper watched her husband being manhandled toward the door. The shock holding her paralyzed finally snapped. The reality that she was losing her primary source of funding overrode her fear of the federal agents. She lunged forward, her high heels catching on the carpet. She did not aim for the agents. She aimed for Marcus. She grabbed the lapels of his expensive bespoke suit, her manicured nails digging into the fabric. "My money!" Harper shrieked, her face inches from his. "You told me the trust accounts were safe. You told me you wired my allowance to the Cayman accounts. Where is my money?" "Marcus." Marcus shoved her backward with his shoulder, unable to use his bound hands. He sneered at her, a look of profound disgust crossing his features. "There is no money, Harper." He spat spittle flying from his lips. "There never was. You spent it all. You drained the operation, dry buying handbags and booking private jets. You want your money. Go ask your parents for another loan." Harper stumbled, catching herself against the conference table. She stared at him, her chest heaving, the brutal truth finally piercing through her delusion. She was broke. She was worse than broke. She was married to a federal criminal. The agents pulled Marcus toward the exit. My mother, realizing the magnitude of the situation, scrambled forward. She intercepted the lead agent, grabbing the sleeve of his tactical vest. "Officer, wait!" my mother cried, her voice desperate, pleading. "You cannot take him. He is our son-in-law. He manages our entire estate. If you freeze his accounts, you will destroy our retirement. We had no knowledge of any criminal activity. We are victims here." The agent looked down at her hand, gripping his vest. He did not pull away, but his eyes were hard and unforgiving. "Ma'am, please step back," the agent commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. My father pushed himself out of his chair. He moved slowly, looking frail and defeated. He approached the agent, attempting to project the authority he used to wield at the country club. "Listen here, son," my father started, his voice wavering. "I am Richard Hastings. I am a prominent figure in this community. My wife and I are the primary guarantors for Hayes Vanguard Capital. We acted in good faith. You must release those funds to us immediately to prevent undue financial hardship." The agent looked at my father, then pulled a second document from his vest. "Richard and Victoria Hastings," the agent asked, confirming their identities. "Yes, that is us," my mother answered quickly, a glimmer of hope returning to her eyes. The agent handed the document to my father. "This is a federal subpoena," the agent stated clinically. "You are both required to appear before a grand jury next Tuesday. You are currently under investigation for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, aiding and abetting money laundering, and the transportation of stolen commercial property across state lines." The remaining color drained from my father's face. He stared at the subpoena as if it were a death warrant. "We did not steal anything," my mother shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly in the confined space. "We thought we were moving Chloe's furniture to help Marcus set up his office. It was a family dispute. Chloe gave him permission. The agent stepped back, gesturing for his team to move Marcus into the hallway. "Ma'am, we have high-definition video footage of you and your husband physically loading stolen commercial inventory into your personal vehicle. Ignorance of the law is not a defense. I suggest you retain federal defense counsel immediately. Your assets are subject to civil forfeiture pending the outcome of the investigation." My parents stood frozen in the center of the room. The reality of their impending indictment settled over them like a shroud. The estate they cherished, the social standing they guarded so viciously, the legacy they built on elitism and exclusion, it was all gone. They were no longer the prominent Hastings family of Beacon Hill. They were unindicted co-conspirators in a federal racketeering case. I stood by the window, my arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. I felt no urge to intervene. I felt no urge to gloat. I watched the agents march Marcus down the hallway, the heavy glass doors swinging shut behind them. I heard the distant, muffled wail of police sirens approaching the building from the street below. My mother collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. My father remained standing, staring blankly at the subpoena, his hands trembling violently. I picked up my leather tote bag and adjusted the strap over my shoulder. I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. Harper was standing near the door, blocking my path. She looked at me, her eyes red and swollen, her makeup smeared across her cheeks. The arrogant, condescending sister who had paraded my stolen money in front of me was gone. In her place stood a terrified, desperate woman realizing she had nowhere left to hide. "Chloe Harper," whispered, her voice cracking. "Chloe, please." I stopped. I looked at her. I did not speak. I waited to hear what kind of manipulation she would attempt next. "You have to help me," Harper pleaded, reaching out to grasp my arm. I pulled away quickly, refusing the contact. She let her hand drop, tears spilling over her eyelashes. "The feds seized my accounts. The bank is going to take the house. I do not have a job. I do not have any money. You have to let me stay with you, just until I figure things out. Please, you are my sister." I stared at her. The audacity of her request was staggering even for her. After enabling Marcus to steal my business, after launching a smear campaign against my mental health, after gloating about my impending bankruptcy, she expected me to offer her sanctuary. I reached into my tote bag. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a document Silas Thorne had drafted for me the day before. It was not a civil suit. It was a formal waiver of liability and a restraining order. I held the document out to her. "This is a legal agreement," I stated, my voice calm and devoid of any familial warmth. "It stipulates that I will not pursue civil damages against you for your role in fencing my stolen antiques. I will not hand over the video footage of you removing the 18th century clock from my carriage house to the local district attorney for prosecution." Harper looked at the paper, then back at me, a flicker of hopeful relief passing through her tear-filled eyes. "You will not press charges?" she asked, her voice trembling with gratitude. In exchange, I continued cutting off her relief. "You will sign this document relinquishing any future claim to my assets, my estate, or my business. You agree to an immediate permanent restraining order prohibiting you from contacting me, approaching my property, or speaking about me to any third party. If you violate these terms, the waiver is nullified, and I will personally hand the surveillance footage to the prosecutor." Harper stared at the document, the terms of her surrender laid out in stark black ink. She realized I was not offering sanctuary. I was offering exile. I was demanding she erase herself from my life completely in exchange for staying out of prison. "You cannot do this," Harper cried, her voice rising in panic. "Where am I supposed to go? How am I supposed to live? I have nothing." I looked at the woman who had demanded I apologize to a thief to save her social standing. "You should have thought about that before you helped him steal my livelihood," I replied coldly. I placed the pen on top of the document and held it out. "Sign it, Harper." I commanded, my voice carrying the absolute authority she used to wield over me. "Sign it and walk out of this building with your freedom. Refuse and I will call Detective Miller right now and add your name to the arrest warrant." Harper looked at my parents. My mother was still sobbing in her chair. My father was staring blankly at the wall, lost in his own impending ruin. They could not save her. They could not even save themselves. With shaking hands, Harper took the pen. She did not read the fine print. She did not argue. She signed her name on the dotted line, sealing her own exile. She handed the paper back to me, her eyes cast down in total defeat. I slipped the document into my bag. I stepped around her and walked out of the conference room, leaving the wreckage of the Hastings family behind me. The heavy glass doors swung shut, closing the chapter on my past forever. I turned away from the heavy frosted glass doors, the sound of my mother's sobbing muffled behind me. I began to walk down the quiet, art-lined corridor of the law firm, feeling a profound sense of liberation. My heels clicked against the polished hardwood, a steady rhythmic beat marking my exit. I was nearly at the elevator bank when I heard the frantic, scrambling footsteps echoing from the conference room. Chloe. Wade Harper burst through the doors, moving with a desperate, uncoordinated urgency. She practically ran down the hallway, her usually perfect posture abandoned. She caught up to me just as I pressed the button to call the elevator. She did not stand beside me. She physically collapsed, dropping to her knees on the expensive runner rug. She reached out her hands, grasping the hem of my dark gray blazer. "Chloe, please." Harper wailed, the sound raw and stripped of any pretense. The golden child, the sister who had spent her entire life looking down on me from a pedestal built by our parents, was now literally begging at my feet. "You have to listen to me," she cried, her tears streaking her mascara. "I swear to you, I did not know anything about the money laundering. I did not know about the cartel or the offshore accounts. Marcus told me his investments were generating massive yields. He told me the money was clean. I am innocent." I stood perfectly still, looking down at the woman gripping my clothing. The elevator chime sounded a soft ping, indicating its arrival. I did not move toward the doors. I needed to finish this. I reached down my hands, moving with deliberate, clinical slowness. I grasped her wrists, peeling her fingers off my jacket one by one. I stepped back, forcing her to look up at me. "You did not know about the money laundering, Harper," I asked, my voice flat, devoid of any sympathy. "I believe you. You were too busy spending the money to ask where it came from." She nodded frantically, eager to latch onto any sliver of absolution. "Yes, exactly. I was a victim too. He lied to me. You have to tell the FBI I was not involved. You have to help me keep my house. I cannot go to prison." I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out the document Silas Thorne had prepared. I held the waiver of liability out so she could see the stark black text. "You did not know about the money laundering." I repeated, my tone shifting into cold precision. "But you knew exactly what you were doing when you walked into my carriage house at 2 a.m. Harper froze, the frantic nodding stopping instantly. The color, whatever remained of it, drained completely from her face. "You knew exactly what you were doing when you picked up a Ming Dynasty vase valued at $50,000, loaded it into the trunk of your luxury sedan, and sold it to a private fence in Manhattan to pay off your personal credit card debt." I continued detailing her crime with agonizing clarity. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. She realized the surveillance footage I showed in the conference room was just a fraction of what I possessed. I had to liquidate my entire emergency fund to compensate the client for that vase, I stated, stepping closer, looming over her kneeling form. "I paid $50,000 out of my own pocket to avoid criminal negligence charges because of your theft. Chloe, I was going to pay you back," she stammered, a desperate, pathetic lie spilling from her lips. "I just needed a bridge loan." Marcus cut off my allowance. I did not let her finish. I crouched down, bringing my face level with hers. "I am not turning that specific video over to the local district attorney," I whispered, ensuring my words carried only to her ears. "I am not pressing grand larceny charges against you. I paid the restitution. I essentially bought your freedom." Harper let out a shaky breath, a flicker of profound relief crossing her features. "Thank you, Chloe. Thank you. I promise I will make it right." I stood back up, towering over her again. I held out the legal document and a silver pen. "You will make it right by signing this waiver," I commanded. "This document legally severs any future claim you might attempt to make on my business, my personal assets, or the carriage house. It includes a permanent, non-negotiable restraining order. You will never contact me again. You will never approach my property." She stared at the paper, then up at me, the relief shattering. "But what about my house? How am I supposed to survive?" The feds froze everything. I looked at the sister who had gleefully texted me a photo of her manicure, mocking my impending homelessness just 24 hours ago. "You are going to walk out of this building with exactly what you tried to leave me with," I replied, my voice steady and completely unyielding. "Nothing. You will pack a single bag and you will figure it out. because if you do not sign this paper right now, I will walk straight into the FBI field office and hand them the 4K footage of you fencing stolen commercial assets across state lines. They will add your name to Marcus's federal indictment before sunset." Harper looked at the pen in my hand. She looked back toward the frosted glass doors of the conference room where our parents remained trapped in their own ruin. She knew they could not save her. She knew Marcus was gone. She was entirely out of options. With a shaking, defeated hand, she took the pen. She did not read the stipulations. She scrawled her signature across the bottom of the page, her tears dropping onto the paper, smudging the ink. She handed the document back to me. She remained kneeling on the floor, weeping silently into her hands. I slipped the signed waiver into my tote bag. I pressed the elevator call button again. The doors slid open immediately. I stepped inside the wood-paneled cab and pressed the button for the lobby. The doors began to close, narrowing my view of the hallway. I watched Harper kneeling alone on the expensive rug, a broken, destitute woman facing the consequences of her own malice. The doors slid shut, cutting off the sight completely. The elevator began its descent, leaving the wreckage behind. I felt a deep, resonant calm settle over me. I had excised the infection. The surgery was brutal, but it was complete. I stepped out of the elevator into the bustling lobby of the office building. The contrast was jarring. Business continued as usual. People hurried past carrying coffees and briefcases, entirely unaware of the federal takedown that had just occurred 40 floors above them. I walked out the revolving glass doors and onto the busy Newark street. The sky had cleared the threatening gray clouds, giving way to bright, sharp sunlight. I pulled my phone from my pocket to call Silas Thorne and confirm the execution of the documents. Before I could dial his number, the screen lit up with an incoming call. The caller ID displayed a number I had deleted from my contacts months ago, but the digits were permanently burned into my memory. It was my father. I stared at the glowing screen. The man who had threatened to bankrupt my business, who had actively participated in the theft of my livelihood to protect his social standing, was calling me mere minutes after the FBI handed him a grand jury subpoena. I considered letting it go to voicemail. I had the signed waivers. I had the blind trust. I was legally insulated from their fallout. But a quiet, relentless curiosity pushed me to answer. I needed to know exactly how far his delusion stretched. I needed to hear the sound of his arrogance finally breaking. I swiped the green icon and brought the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. I just listened to the heavy, ragged breathing on the other end of the line. I stood on the bustling Newark sidewalk, the noise of city traffic rushing past me. I held the phone to my ear, listening to the shallow, frantic breaths echoing from the receiver. "Chloe," my father's voice cracked, sounding weak and hollow. "Are you still there? Please do not hang up." I did not respond. I waited, forcing him to endure the silence, letting him understand that I no longer owed him the courtesy of a greeting. "Your mother and I are in the lobby," he said, his words tumbling out in a rushed, desperate cadence. "We followed you down. We saw you talking to Harper. Chloe, we need to speak with you. Right now. It is an absolute emergency." I turned around. Through the large revolving glass doors of the office building, I spotted them. They looked nothing like the arrogant, impeccably styled couple who had entered the building an hour ago. My father's tie was loosened, his suit jacket wrinkled. My mother clutched her designer handbag against her chest, like a shield, her face pale and streaked with ruined makeup. They spotted me standing near the curb and hurried through the doors, practically tripping over themselves to reach me. I ended the call and slipped the phone into my pocket. I did not move toward them. I planted my feet on the concrete, crossing my arms, waiting for the final performance to begin. They reached me, both of them out of breath. My mother reached out, attempting to grasp my hands. I stepped back sharply, creating a physical boundary they could not cross. "Chloe, sweetheart." My mother gasped, shifting instantly into the role of the devoted, terrified parent. "You have to help us. The agents took everything. The bank called your father's cell phone while we were in the elevator. The foreclosure process on the Beacon Hill estate is moving forward immediately. They are freezing the remaining checking accounts. We have nowhere to go." My father nodded vigorously, his eyes wide and pleading. He looked like a man drowning, grasping for any piece of floating debris. "You are the only one left, Chloe. You are the only one with liquid assets. The carriage house is secure. Your business is clear of Marcus's mess. We need a place to stay. Just until the lawyers sort out this grand jury nightmare and we can unfreeze our secondary accounts, we can move into your guest room tonight." I stared at them. The sheer staggering audacity of the request paralyzed me for a fraction of a second. They had spent months participating in a scheme designed to bankrupt me, seize my property, and institutionalize me for mental instability. Yet the moment their golden son-in-law evaporated their wealth, they instantly pivoted, expecting me to provide sanctuary and financial support without a shred of hesitation. I looked at my mother, tracing the familiar lines of her face, recognizing the calculation behind her tears. I looked at my father, seeing the cowardly opportunist hiding behind the veneer of patriarchal authority. "You want to move into my home?" I stated, my voice dangerously quiet, slicing through the ambient noise of the street. "Yes, exactly," my father replied eagerly, mistaking my quiet tone for compliance. "Just for a few months. We are family, Chloe. Family must stick together in a crisis. We are relying on you. You are our only hope." I uncrossed my arms. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out the forensic accounting report, the same 50-page document detailing their financial ruin that I had thrown on the conference room table. I held the thick stack of papers in my hand. "Family," I repeated, rolling the word around in my mouth like a bitter pill. "Let us talk about family, Dad. Let us talk about how this family operates." I took a step closer, my gaze locking onto his terrified eyes. "When I was 19 years old," I said, raising my voice just enough to ensure they heard every syllable clearly, "you drained my college savings account. You forged my signature and stole $45,000 of my hard-earned money to pay off the victim of Harper's drunk driving accident, ensuring your golden daughter avoided a felony conviction. You told me it was my duty to sacrifice for the family." My mother flinched, looking away. My father opened his mouth to offer an excuse, but I did not let him speak. Now at 32, I continued, my anger crystallizing into a cold diamond hard precision. "You actively participated in a conspiracy to steal my livelihood. You stood in my driveway, smiling warmly at the man who was bleeding your own retirement dry, and personally loaded my restored antique furniture into the trunk of your Lexus. You tried to force me into bankruptcy to cover up a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. Chloe, please, we did not know he was laundering money," my mother wailed, clutching her bag tighter. "We thought we were just helping him manage a difficult transition. We thought you were being unreasonable." I slammed the forensic report against my father's chest. He stumbled back reflexively, catching the heavy document before it hit the pavement. "You are not my family," I declared, the finality of the statement ringing in the crisp air. "You have never been my family. You are parasites. You attached yourselves to Marcus because he offered you prestige, and when he drained you dry, you immediately tried to attach yourselves to me." My father stared at the forensic report in his hands, his face crumbling. "You cannot leave us like this, Chloe. We will be living on the street. We will have nothing. Go live in a cardboard box under the turnpike and demand Marcus pay you rent," I replied, my voice stripped of any remaining empathy. "Or better yet, ask your country club friends if you can sleep on their tennis courts. I am sure they will be thrilled to host unindicted federal co-conspirators." I turned my back on them, adjusting the strap of my tote bag on my shoulder. "Do not ever call my phone again," I stated, speaking over my shoulder without looking back. "Do not approach my property. If I see either of you anywhere near my home or my business, I will call the police and file trespassing charges." "Chloe," my mother screamed, her voice echoing down the street raw with panic and total devastation. "Chloe, come back here. We are your parents. You owe us." I did not stop walking. I did not turn around. I blended into the bustling crowd of pedestrians, the sound of her frantic screaming growing fainter with every step until the noise of the city swallowed it completely. I hailed a cab, climbed into the back seat, and gave the driver the address for Silas Thorne's office. I had one final piece of business to conclude before I could truly close the door on my past. The cab wove through the Newark traffic. I leaned my head against the cool window glass, watching the city blur past. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation was beginning to recede, replaced by a deep, resonant exhaustion. I had survived the gauntlet, but the battlefield was littered with wreckage. I needed to ensure my own assets were completely insulated from the impending legal fallout. I arrived at Silas Thorne's office. The atmosphere here was vastly different from the chaotic scene I had just escaped. The reception area was quiet, orderly, and smelled faintly of expensive coffee and polished wood. The paralegal greeted me immediately, ushering me into Silas's private suite. Silas was sitting behind his desk, reviewing a stack of digital files on his monitor. He looked up as I entered, a rare, genuine smile crossing his stern features. The FBI raid was successful, Silas announced, closing his laptop. Marcus Hayes is currently in federal custody. The offshore accounts are frozen, and the syndicate's domestic shell companies are being dismantled as we speak. Your parents are scheduled for grand jury testimony next week. I sat down in one of the leather guest chairs, placing my tote bag on the floor. I told him about the encounter on the street. I told him about my parents demanding to move into my home. Silas chuckled darkly, shaking his head. The audacity of the entitled class never ceases to amaze me. He pulled a thick folder from his desk drawer and handed it across to me. I opened the folder. It contained the finalized documentation for the blind trust in Wyoming. Your assets are fully secured, Silas confirmed. The carriage house, the commercial property deed, and your liquid capital are now legally held by the trust. You are shielded from any civil forfeiture claims stemming from your parents' or your brother-in-law's criminal activities. You are untouchable. I reviewed the documents, tracing my finger over the official seals and signatures. The knot of anxiety that had lived in my chest for the past 3 years finally dissolved. I was safe. I was free. However, Silas continued, leaning forward, his expression turning serious. There is one remaining loose end we need to address. The local authorities still have the initial fraud complaint Marcus filed against you regarding the stolen antiques. The federal investigation supersedes it, but the local file needs to be formally closed to clear your business reputation completely. I looked up from the trust documents. How do we close it? We need to present a sworn affidavit detailing the origin of the video evidence, Silas explained. The local prosecutor needs formal verification of how you obtained the 4K surveillance footage showing Marcus receiving the stolen property. We need to officially introduce your neighbor, Mrs. Gable, into the record. I nodded slowly, realizing the final step required me to involve the woman who had handed me the key to my salvation. I had not spoken to Mrs. Gable since the day the brown padded envelope appeared on my porch. I did not know why she had chosen to intervene or why she had kept the surveillance footage a secret for so long. I will handle it, I told Silas, closing the folder and slipping it into my bag. I will speak with her tonight. I left Silas's office and drove back to my quiet suburban neighborhood. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, golden shadows across the manicured lawns. I parked in my driveway, the carriage house standing silent and secure in the background. I did not go inside my home. I walked across the street, my heels clicking softly on the asphalt, heading straight for the Victorian house with the wraparound porch. It was time to settle my final debt. The dust settled over the next 2 months, but the impact of the federal raid left a permanent crater in the New Jersey social landscape. The local newspapers and business journals ran the story on their front pages. Prominent investment manager indicted in multi-million-dollar syndicate bust. The articles detailed the scope of Marcus's operation, the offshore accounts, the forged commercial loans, and the staggering losses incurred by his investors. Marcus Hayes accepted a plea deal to avoid a protracted trial that would have inevitably ended in a longer sentence. He pleaded guilty to federal wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering charges. The judge handed down a 15-year sentence in a federal penitentiary devoid of any possibility for early parole. The arrogant financial prodigy traded his bespoke suits for a standard-issue khaki jumpsuit. The collateral damage devastated my family exactly as I had predicted. My parents, the proud status-obsessed Hastings of Beacon Hill, were publicly humiliated. Their names featured prominently in the unsealed grand jury indictments. While they managed to avoid prison time by proving they were merely ignorant pawns rather than active architects of the syndicate, the financial consequences were absolute. The IRS seized their remaining assets to cover the massive tax liabilities generated by Marcus's fraudulent shell companies. The bank foreclosed on their sprawling estate. The country club formally revoked their membership, and their affluent social circle severed all contact, treating them like a contagious disease. Destitute and disgraced, my parents were forced to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. They relocated to a cramped, poorly maintained two-bedroom rental apartment on the outskirts of the city. To afford their basic living expenses and the mounting legal fees from their civil defense, my father took a job as a greeter at a local hardware store, while my mother found work processing returns at a discount retail chain. They were living the exact nightmare they had tried to force upon me. Harper fared no better. The federal asset forfeiture protocols stripped her of everything she claimed to own. The luxury cars were repossessed. The designer jewelry and handbags were seized and auctioned to compensate the defrauded investors. Penniless and facing intense public scrutiny, she filed for divorce while Marcus awaited sentencing. She moved into a small studio apartment above a noisy commercial district. The woman who once flaunted her Maldives vacations on social media now worked double shifts as a waitress at a mid-tier steakhouse, enduring the condescending pity of her former socialite friends who occasionally dined there. I watched the fallout from a comfortable distance, focusing my energy on rebuilding my business. The formal closure of the local fraud complaint facilitated by Silas Thorne cleared my name entirely. My clients returned, realizing the initial scandal was a fabricated smear campaign. I expanded my restoration studio, taking on a team of apprentices and securing several high-profile contracts with prominent historical societies. Yet I knew my resurgence was not solely the result of my own resilience. I owed my salvation to a quiet 72-year-old woman who sat on her porch and watched the world. I invited Mrs. Gable to dinner on a Thursday evening in late October. I did not choose a casual neighborhood diner. I made a reservation at the most exclusive Michelin-starred restaurant in downtown Newark. I wanted to express my gratitude in a manner that reflected the magnitude of her intervention. I arrived early and waited at a private table near the back of the elegant dining room. Mrs. Gable arrived precisely on time. She wore a tailored wool coat over a simple, elegant dress, her silver hair arranged neatly. She did not look intimidated by the opulent surroundings. She looked entirely comfortable, moving with the quiet, observant grace of a woman who was accustomed to assessing her environment before engaging with it. I stood and greeted her warmly, pulling out her chair. We ordered a bottle of vintage Bordeaux and a selection of the chef's tasting menu. For the first hour, we did not discuss the police raid, the federal indictments, or my family. We talked about her late husband, her career in military data analysis, and her meticulous rose garden. She possessed a sharp, dry wit and an analytical mind that remained incredibly formidable. When the waiter cleared our main courses and poured the last of the wine, the atmosphere shifted. The pleasantries concluded, and it was time to address the business that brought us together. I reached into my handbag and retrieved a thick, heavy envelope. I placed it on the crisp white linen tablecloth and slid it across to her. Mrs. Gable looked at the envelope, then up at me, her expression neutral. "What is this, Chloe?" she asked, her tone steady. I did not want to just say thank you. I began, keeping my voice low and earnest. Saying thank you does not adequately cover the fact that you saved me from federal prison and total financial ruin. You handed me the exact weapon I needed to dismantle a criminal operation that was actively trying to destroy me. She rested her hands on the table, her eyes watching me closely. "I sat on my porch for 5 years, Chloe," she said quietly. "I watched you work 80-hour weeks. I watched you build that studio from nothing. I also watched your sister parade around in luxury cars while you drove a 10-year-old sedan. I watched your brother-in-law install heavy safes in your building under the cover of darkness. I knew exactly what was happening. I just needed you to realize it. You took a massive risk getting involved," I pointed out. "You could have been targeted by the syndicate if Marcus figured out where the footage came from." Mrs. Gable offered a small, dismissive scoff. "I spent 20 years analyzing satellite imagery of hostile insurgent camps for the Department of Defense. I am not intimidated by a man wearing a cheap suit pretending to be a gangster in a suburban driveway." I smiled, feeling a profound respect for the woman sitting across from me. I nodded toward the envelope resting between us. "Open it," I suggested gently. She picked up the envelope, unsealed the flap, and withdrew a certified cashier's check. She looked at the printed numbers, her eyebrows rising slightly in surprise. $20,000, she read aloud, her voice maintaining its calm composure. Chloe, this is extremely generous, but I did not provide the footage expecting a reward. I provided it because I dislike bullies, and I strongly dislike thieves operating in my neighborhood. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. It is not a gift, Mrs. Gable, I clarified, holding her gaze. It is a retainer fee. She lowered the check, her interest visibly piqued. A retainer for what I am expanding my business, I explained. I am acquiring high-value inventory and negotiating contracts with international historical societies. I need to ensure my assets and my operational security are absolutely watertight. I need someone who understands surveillance architecture, data encryption, and threat analysis. I paused, letting the offer settle. I want to hire you as the lead security consultant for my firm. It is a part-time remote position. You can work entirely from your home. You can set up the camera networks, monitor the feeds, and manage the digital security protocols. I need someone I can trust implicitly, and you have already proven your capabilities far beyond any corporate security firm I could hire. Mrs. Gable looked at the check, then looked out the window at the city lights glowing against the dark sky. She remained silent for a long moment, tapping her manicured fingernail against the table. She picked up her wineglass, took a slow, deliberate sip, and set it back down. A slow, subtle smile spread across her face, reaching her sharp, observant eyes. You know, Chloe, she said, her voice carrying a tone of dry, unmistakable amusement, I have upgraded my server capacity over the last few months. My network is incredibly robust. She leaned in slightly, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. And between you and me, I still have dozens of high-resolution video files covering the activities of several other remarkably unpleasant neighbors in our subdivision. The homeowners association would be very interested in what happens when they think no one is watching. I laughed, a genuine, unburdened sound that I had not felt in years. I raised my wineglass, offering a toast. To corporate security, I said, clinking my glass against hers. To watching the neighborhood, she replied, her smile widening into a grin. The dinner concluded, and we parted ways on the street outside the restaurant. I watched Mrs. Gable climb into a waiting taxi, her posture upright and confident. She was not just a retired widow tending to a garden. She was a formidable ally, and she was now officially on my payroll. I walked toward my parked car, the cool autumn air refreshing against my skin. The heavy, suffocating weight that had crushed my chest for years was gone entirely. The lingering anxiety, the constant need to defend my reality against my family's gaslighting, the fear of Marcus's retaliation, it had all been eradicated. I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat. The dashboard clock glowed brightly in the dark interior. It was past 10 o'clock. My phone sat quietly in the cup holder. There were no frantic text messages from Harper demanding money. There were no voicemails from my father threatening my business lease. The silence from my biological family was absolute, and it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I started the engine, pulling out into the sparse city traffic, heading back toward the suburbs. The conflict was resolved, the enemies were vanquished, the allies were secured. But as I drove through the quiet streets, my mind began to pivot toward the future. The carriage house was secure, but the physical space felt tainted by Marcus's presence. I needed to reclaim it entirely, to scrub away the residue of his criminal enterprise and rebuild it into something undeniably mine. I needed a grand public declaration of my independence, a professional triumph that would permanently solidify my reputation in the industry. I stopped at a red light, my fingers tapping rhythmically against the steering wheel. I remembered a conversation I had with an estate liquidator 3 weeks prior before the raid. He mentioned a massive, highly secretive auction occurring in upstate New York next month. It involved the complete liquidation of a disgraced billionaire's antique collection, including several pieces rumored to be of immense historical significance. It was an invitation-only event restricted to the top-tier collectors and restorers in the country. The light turned green. I pressed the accelerator. I knew exactly what my next move had to be. I needed to secure an invitation to that auction, and I needed to acquire the centerpiece of the collection. It would require significant capital-aggressive negotiation and navigating a circle of elite collectors who were far more ruthless than my family ever was. The real game was just beginning. 6 months have passed since the federal raid dismantled the syndicate and shattered my biological family. I stand at the top of my gravel driveway, holding a cup of black coffee, breathing in the crisp morning air. The structure standing before me bears zero resemblance to the dark, oppressive fortress Marcus constructed during his brief illicit occupation. I tore down the cheap drywall and ripped out the heavy blackout blinds. In their place, a stunning architectural framework of tempered glass and aged white oak now rises toward the sky. Sunlight pours freely into the interior, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the warm air. The carriage house is no longer a monument to fraud. It is a sanctuary of restoration, a luminous symbol of my reclaimed independence. Mrs. Gable installed a state-of-the-art biometric security network during the renovation. Her protocols remain entirely invisible to the naked eye, but form an impenetrable barrier around my property. I press my thumb against the sleek steel reader mounted beside the entrance. The heavy oak door glides open silently, welcoming me into my own domain. The scent of lavender wax, rich mahogany, and raw linseed oil washes over me, permanently banishing the lingering stench of stale cigars and criminal desperation that once haunted this space. My assistant Leo stands near the front display window, carefully unwrapping a 17th-century Venetian mirror. He handles the delicate artifact with the quiet reverence it deserves. My phone vibrates in my pocket, delivering a daily schedule alert. The screen displays 3 consecutive appointments for the afternoon. A museum curator traveling from Boston, a private collector flying in on a chartered jet from Chicago, and a representative from a prestigious historical society based in London. My project waitlist currently stretches deep into the next calendar year. The scandal that my family assumed would obliterate my career achieved the exact opposite result. When the federal indictments became public record, the elite collecting community learned the truth. They realized that an appraiser, who willingly cooperates with federal agents, who refuses to compromise her integrity, even when threatened by her own relatives, is an appraiser they can trust with their most priceless heritage. My business did not just survive the smear campaign, it exploded into a thriving, highly sought-after enterprise. A courier van pulls up to the curb outside the glass facade. The driver approaches the door holding a thick silver envelope sealed with dark crimson wax. He asks for my signature. I sign the digital pad and take the package. I recognize the wax seal instantly. It belongs to the secretive upstate New York auction house I set my sights on weeks ago. I break the wax and slide out the heavy cardstock. It is not merely a bidder registration. The board of directors has requested my presence as their primary authentication expert for a highly disputed collection of Victorian-era furniture. The consulting fee they offer in the attached contract eclipses my entire annual revenue from 3 years ago. I trace my finger over the embossed lettering, feeling the tangible weight of my own hard-earned success. I place the invitation on my drafting desk and look around the quiet studio. The silence in the room is profound. There are no frantic, manipulative text messages illuminating my screen. There are no impromptu tribunals waiting in my living room to demand my submission or criticize my choices. There are no fabricated medical certificates circulating to undermine my sanity. The absence of their toxic noise is not a void. It is a vast blank canvas where I now paint my own future. I think about my parents currently waking up in a cramped, poorly insulated rental unit. They are putting on cheap uniforms to endure another grueling shift at a hardware store and a discount retail chain desperate to pay off their crushing tax liabilities. They traded their Beacon Hill mansion and their country club prestige for the illusion of power, and now they have nothing. I think about Harper navigating the grueling reality of the service industry. The sister who once mocked my livelihood while parading my stolen funds on social media is now refilling water glasses for the same wealthy socialites she used to consider her peers. She traded her loyalty for designer handbags, and now she carries empty trays. I think about Marcus stripped of his bespoke suits and his arrogant smirk, wearing a standard-issue uniform in a federal penitentiary. He is confined to a concrete cell, serving a 15-year sentence without the possibility of parole. He believed he was the smartest man in the room. He believed he could use my family as a human shield and my property as a criminal laundromat. I realize a fundamental truth as I stand in the center of my booming enterprise. The flawless retribution does not involve screaming matches. It does not require you to back your enemies into a corner or destroy your own peace trying to prove your innocence to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. True retribution is an exercise in stillness. It is the discipline to step out of the way and allow destructive people to dig their own graves. I did not push my family over the edge of the cliff. I merely illuminated the precipice they were already running toward. I handed them the shovels, and they eagerly excavated their own ruin. If you are sitting in a room right now, surrounded by people who invalidate your reality, I need you to listen to me. If you are dealing with individuals who steal your resources, diminish your achievements, and rewrite history to cast themselves as the victims, if you are being told that your rational reactions to their abuse are evidence of your own instability, your silence when bullied is not cowardice. Your refusal to engage in their theatrical arguments is not a sign of weakness. It is data collection. Narcissists and liars thrive on your emotional response. They want you to scream. They want you to cry. They want you to defend yourself because every defense you offer gives them another angle to twist another word to weaponize against you. Do not give them the ammunition. Do not play their game on their distorted terms. Document the abuse. Secure your assets. Find your allies in the shadows. Keep your face blank and your moves hidden. Let them believe they are outsmarting you. Let their arrogance blind them to their own exposure. Do not argue with liars. Let the camera do it for you. Let the financial records speak. Let the bank statements, the timestamps, and the legal filings deliver the final crushing verdict. You do not owe loyalty to the people who use your bloodline as a leash. You do not owe your future to those who tried to dismantle your past. Build your empire in the quiet. Restore your peace with the same meticulous, unwavering care you would use to restore a priceless artifact. And when the trap finally snaps shut on the people who tried to destroy you, you will not have to lift a single finger to finish the job. You will simply stand in the sunlight breathing free air and watch them fade into the background. I pour a fresh cup of dark roast coffee and step out onto the porch of my home. The morning sun catches the pristine glass facade of the newly renovated carriage house, casting bright, clear reflections across the driveway. The air is quiet, devoid of the suffocating tension that used to choke this property. The nightmare of Marcus Harper and my parents feels like a distant, fading echo. I survived the profound betrayal of the very people who were supposed to protect me, and in the ashes of that destruction, I learned exactly how to forge my own armor. Looking back at the wreckage they created and the empire I reclaimed, I want to leave you with 3 distinct lessons that kept me standing when the ground collapsed. First, silence is your most lethal weapon against manipulation. Gaslighters and narcissists feed on your panic. They desperately want your tears and your outrage because your emotional reaction validates their control over your reality. When you stop arguing, stop defending yourself, and start documenting, you strip them of their primary fuel source. You do not need to convince a liar that they are lying. You just need to gather the cold, hard proof and wait for the precise moment to drop the anvil. Second, shared DNA is not a binding contract for enduring abuse. Society conditions us to forgive toxic relatives, no matter the cost, pushing the narrative that blood ties demand infinite second chances. But loyalty without mutual respect is just a hostage situation. You hold the right to evict parasites from your life, even if you have known them since birth. The chosen family you build through trust and mutual support will always prove stronger than the biological family you inherited by default. Third, the ultimate revenge is not a spectacle. It is entirely internal. It is not merely about watching your enemies face federal indictments or financial ruin, though the swift delivery of justice is undeniably satisfying. True retribution is waking up in a home you own, stepping into a business you built from the ground up, and realizing their permanent absence has left you entirely free to soar. You reclaim your power by thriving in the exact spaces they tried to burn down. I take a final sip of my coffee, turn my back on the empty street, and walk inside my sanctuary. The work is waiting, the restoration continues, and the future is finally mine to shape. Thank you for walking through this journey with me until the very end. If my experience gave you the courage to enforce your own ironclad boundaries, to walk away from toxic dynamics, or to simply recognize your inherent worth, drop a comment below. I read every single one. Please hit the like button and subscribe to Olivia Stories Revenge for more narratives about taking back your power and letting the truth do the talking. Stay sharp, guard your peace, and I will see you in the next story.